to tonight's meeting of the Port Phillip City Council. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willem clan of the Boonwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we acknowledge and uphold their traditional relationship to this land. I remind the gallery that Council's meeting law requires that members of the gallery must not interject or take part in Council debate. Any person who is called to order may be requested to leave the chamber. The Mayor may invite members of the gallery to speak for up to 3 minutes on a report listed on the agenda. There is also time allotted in tonight's agenda for public question time. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that's available at the table just outside the chamber and hand it to a staff member. If you have registered to speak online, you must let a staff member know that you have arrived. I encourage you to limit your questions and comments to 3 minutes and to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers. And please note that all council meetings are live streamed to allow the community to watch and to listen in real time. And in accordance with council's local law, this meeting cannot be separately filmed or audio taped unless permission is granted by the Mayor. In the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the emergency warden. So, councillors, we're going to the agenda now, and first up, we've got apologies. Do we have any apologies? And I note we're all here. 2, the minutes of the previous meetings. Councillors, the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 5th of February 2020 have been circulated. Do you have any questions in relation to these minutes? I note there are none. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Actually, sorry. Who moved it? Good question. I'm jumping right ahead. Councillor Baxter to move, Councillor Gross to second. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. Item 3 is declarations of conflicts of interest. Does anyone have a conflict of interest in any matter being discussed on tonight's agenda? I note there are none. 4, petitions and joint letters. We don't have any petitions or joint letters on tonight's agenda. 5, sealing schedule, and we don't have any documents that require sealing. 6, which is public question time, and we have 3 people that have requested to speak. So I'd like to ask Mr. Michael Zabata. Welcome. Please pop on the microphone and state your name and suburb, Mr. Zabata.
Thank you, Councillors. Michael Sabata, a resident of South Melbourne. I have a few questions regarding the South Melbourne Town Hall. My first, because I've asked this in various forums, and I think I need to probably put it on the record now, perhaps to get a response. Is there a report on the incident that led to the water damage in the South Melbourne Town Hall? And does that report include, amongst other things, the root cause that led to the incident? And can this report be made public and, of course, provided to all the councillors? And if it can't be made public, why not? And finally, has the impact of the incident on the Town Hall and the rectification works that are required to repair the damage, have they been documented, and the works to make those to be performed, have they been costed? And when will those costs, when will that damage and cost be shared with the councillors and the public? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Zabata. Mr. Carroll will look at answering some or all of those questions.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. I'll first of all apologise to Mr. Zabata if there's been any questions that he hasn't had a response to, and I'll follow up to just check on that. But in terms of whether there's a report on the incident that led to the damage at South Melbourne Town Hall, we did engage a structural engineer with expertise in historical buildings to assess the affected areas, and also he made recommendations to make safe the affected area. Does the report include the root cause that led to the incident? If not, why not? The exact reason for the ceiling collapse could not be confirmed due to the level of water and other damage that occurred at the time of the incident. In the engineer's opinion, a small section of a bearing plate concealed within the external wall cavity was a likely point of failure, weakened by age and undetectable through water damage. I've personally been in the building and had a look at that particular section. Can the report be made public? Not at the moment. We're working through the insurance claims process, and in that regard we want to maintain confidentiality on that report. Has the impact of the incident on the town hall and the rectification works that are required to repair the damage caused by the incident been documented and the works costed? When will this be shared with councillors and the public? So in addition to the required repair work in response to the water damage, there was a number of renewal works, scheduled renewal works for the future as part of our ongoing asset management and care for that building, such as sprinklers were due for upgrade, the air conditioning as well. So because of that and the age of the hall and the nature of the work that's required, we're looking at considering those works as a whole. So we're doing a comprehensive review at the moment. There's a project that's been established, there's funding in the council plan, and once complete we will share that with the councillors and the public. Mr Johnson might be able to give me a time frame for when we could expect that report, but otherwise I'll take it on notice.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we'll have to take that on notice. Sorry.
Mr Carroll, I'm going to ask a question that I think has come out of that report. In terms of the report on the incident, you said it can't be made public now because it's going through an insurance process and you need to get that confidential. Is there any ability to make that public in the future?
Through you, Mayor, I believe that would be fine.
Thank you. Mr Virgil Hess, please. Welcome.
My first question, hello, how are you?
And would you state your name again, please?
Virgil Hess, St Kilda.
Thank you.
My first question is about the public area which is on top of the Beachcomber Cafe. This 2020 St Kilda Festival, the door was locked, so you couldn't access it. But it didn't stop a lot of people. There was a ladder that was put over the air conditioning units, so you could climb up over the air conditioning units to access that area. I asked the manager at Beachcombers, Justin, why is the door locked? And he said to me, there's a private function up there. Now, this is correct. There was a private function up there, but the public area is in no way affecting that private function. People could quite easily go up there for a few minutes, and look around and use the public area for what it was intended for. 2018, I got pretty roughed up by one of the security guards up there. And I asked questions then, why was the door locked? And it's still, again, 2019 it was the same, and again 2020. So there's a security guard at the bottom of the stairs that you climb up to get to this public area. So I don't understand why there'd be a problem. But when you lock the door, people will still get up there. And unfortunately, or luckily, nobody has been electrocuted yet.
So what is your question tonight to us?
Why is the door locked?
Why is the door locked? Okay. Mr Johnson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we'll look into the allegations as to what was occurring.
It's not an allegation, it's a fact.
Yeah,
and there's
absolutely.
also a sticker on the
Hess.
door which says it's been
Thank you.
closed since July.
Please, you've asked your question. Now it's Mr Johnson's turn to respond.
So through you, Madam Mayor, we'll look into what occurred on the night of the St Kilda Festival, and we'll take that on notice and get a response back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. My second question is with the plastic recycling, and I know I saw you in Mozart Street with the plastisphalt, great idea, and I know you've got another program at South Melbourne Market for the low-density polyethylene milk containers. Great idea. Why don't we do high-density polyethylene, which is things like the milk lids? And what we can do with that is you can granulate it and you can turn it into 3D printing spool material, and you could supply primary schools with printing spool, which would be useful for their 3D printing. I don't know if that's a thing in primary schools, but I've got my own program going, but I can't scale it up. I'm only very small, collecting polyethylene. It's hard work. But if you did it from a council level, that's my time, that's my 3 minutes. If you could do it at a council level, you could even sell it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
we'll
thank
ask
you.
that question, Mr.
Next time,
Castanet. I can also say that it is 3D printers are in primary schools.
Yeah,
my kids use them.
Good.
Anyway.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Certainly we have supported some kindergartens in collecting bottle tops and a range of other plastics for those things. We do know, I am aware that some of the bottle top users, such as turning it into different artificial products and the like, actually have an oversupply of bottle tops throughout the area.
You can granulate it and store it.
Thank you, Mr. Hess.
Anyway, thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate the time.
Did you finish what you were saying?
Sure. Just to finish that question, so we don't have a dedicated service for it, and there may be, we can look into it, but we don't have a dedicated service for that at the moment.
Thank you. And our last speaker for public question time, Steve Phillips, please. Welcome. If you could pop on the microphone and state your name and suburb, please.
Steve Phillips, Lake Ward, St Kilda. Madam Mayor, councillors, officers, good evening. I just from the outset want to say I went to the St Kilda Festival recently and it was a great success, so thank you very much. Since I last asked a question about emissions, Australia has experienced horrific bushfires followed by extreme flooding events. I'd like to ask, with regard to sustainability and emissions in St Kilda and Port Phillip, what was the result of the recent tender for the diesel generators for the festival? Were emissions reduced as a result of this tender? Were the emissions measured for the last St Kilda Festival and what were they? What plans are in place to reduce these emissions over time? Also, I understand there is insufficient electrical network capacity for events to connect to the electrical network in the recently upgraded Ackland Plaza. Why was the network not upgraded at the same time as the tram electrical network was upgraded? And my final question is, has the Council considered doing a cost-benefit analysis for upgrading the electrical grid capacity in festival areas so that diesel generator costs and emissions and pollution can be reduced as the electricity grid is decarbonised over time?
Mr. Phillips, I think we might prepare the answers for that and take that on notice, and we'll get back to you. But I can say that the diesel generator was using biofuels, so there was some reduction for the festival. But we'll get back with the details.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move to councillor question time. Councillors, are there any questions for the officers? Councillor Bond.
I was in Ackland Street, St Kilda, yesterday, and I noticed the installation of a CCTV camera unit being installed on the corner of Belford Street and Ackland Street. I've had numerous people in the community contact me and congratulate councillors for that initiative. I'm just wondering when that camera will be active and relaying footage back to the police station. If you have a timeline for that, please.
Mr. Johnson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I know that it will be soon. I don't know the exact time. It's obviously been something that's been taking a long time to get all the cameras linked back to the police station. I'm happy to come back to Councillor Bond and advise him of a time when that's clarified.
Mr Johnson, is it still getting the private building owners to agree?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes it is. The way that the cameras work is they bounce the signal off repeaters that are mounted to either other infrastructure, so it might be things like private properties, tram poles, electricity poles, that kind of stuff, to get back to the St Kilda Police Station in Chapel Street.
Thank you. Any further questions for the officers, councillors? Okay, then we'll move on to the substantive agenda. Item 8 is the presentation of the CEO report. Don't think we have an item on that one. So we don't have any questions for members of the public. Councillors, do you have any questions for the officers? Councillor Crawford, I can see you. Councillor Copsey.
Thank you. On page 6 of the CEO report, unfortunately, the In Our Backyard strategy implementation is listed as off track, and I'm wondering if officers could elaborate on the actions we're taking to address that.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So councillors will receive a briefing on the 11th of March. Officers are working to respond to the fact that some of the assumptions underpinning In Our Backyard, namely that there would be matching state government funding and a program of works could be negotiated, haven't come to fruition, and that's not likely. We're awaiting there's a current round of funding applications under the Social Housing Growth Fund, and we're aware of a couple of applications within the city. If they're successful, that will be great, because that would deliver some social housing units at about the ratio council was envisaging, which is roughly a certain proportion provided by state government and a certain proportion from council assets. If that's not successful, or at the end of this, there is unlikely that council will be able to achieve the outcomes that you've set in Our Backyard, because there is no likely additional state government program. So officers will be taking up some options for councils to consider about how you respond to that. The other areas, we're having some good news or more positive news, which is in relation to advocacy around inclusionary zoning, particularly at Fisherman's Bend. So that work is progressing well. But at the moment, it is unlikely that the aspirations in the report for the number of social housing units will be able to be met unless there's additional state government funding. So we'll be taking a report to council about how you might like to respond to that.
Thank you, Mr Keenan. Councillor Crawford? No? Anybody else that has a question on the CEO report? No? Then if not, we have an officer's recommendation to accept that. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Copsey to move, Councillor Pearl to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion?
This is a really detailed report. In particular, there's heaps of information in here about council's financial position that is available, and I think there's a lot of transparency being provided by officers in that regard. So I just wanted to highlight that, thank the CEO and the team for the work that goes into producing these reports, and encourage people to have a look.
Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak to the... Would anyone else like to speak? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll move to item 9.1, which is the submission for endorsement, the Parliamentary Inquiry into homelessness in Victoria. And we don't have any members of the public that have requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? I note there are none. Then do we have a mover for this? Councillor Gross to move. Have a seconder. Councillor Copsey. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak?
So this is a really important inquiry, and important inquiries are places where this council should be participating and speaking about things that are very dear to our heart. If you look into the substance of what we've argued in our report, it is persuasive, well put together, and I'm proud that we've done it. And I go back to what the Productivity Commission said about expenditure on public housing in Victoria, and shows that it is almost half what other benchmark states are spending on public housing. It's no surprise that we've got an appalling situation. And it is surprising because Victoria is often noted for and famous for and proclaims that it's very progressive. But on this benchmark issue, we are not. And this point needs to be made and emphasised, and it's good to see that City of Port Phillip, which has a history of actually putting up dollars in this issue, is now lurching onto the field of battle. So I commend this contribution to all councillors and hope that it's passed.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Copsey.
It's a really important submission. Thank you to officers for preparing it and bringing it. I understand it's been submitted, but bringing it for endorsement so that councillors have the opportunity to endorse this in the chamber. Just a couple of key points that I think are very well made in the submission is the history we have in Port Phillip of action on this issue, our commitment to social justice, and that's a proud tradition in this city. I think it's wonderful that the submission underlines that the City of Port Phillip takes an approach to homelessness that recognises human rights, and also points out that homelessness, as Councillor Gross has mentioned, is a housing problem. And the core problem is the lack of available housing in order to meet need for people's right to safe and secure housing. So thank you very much, officers, and I hope that this inquiry delivers some much needed change.
Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Brand.
I welcome this report too, and I just note another key finding. I think that it's reinforced the one that was just mentioned, that the key cause of homelessness is the lack of housing, and right across the state, right across the country, but across the state and here too, that it is essentially a market failure, that there isn't enough housing for the people that need it, and it does require spending on the social services of building houses that can house people. And I'm proud that we're part of that. Not doing a fantastic job of it at the moment, but I'm proud of it as our tradition, and a bit appalled that we've, in a civilised country like Australia, in an enlightened state like Victoria, that we're actually doing so badly, and the evidence is around us every day of our lives.
Councillor Pearl.
We need to fix this terrible issue, and there's one element to this whole discussion I don't think is talked about enough, and this doesn't get used against me by some people, but the ultimate cause of homelessness, according to all the reports that I've read in the US and Australia, is the loss of a job and decision making around financials, and these reports don't usually focus on those decisions, and it's a parallel I draw, which is nothing to do with the root cause of the issue, but the biggest cause of divorce in Australia is money. But when I went to my marriage counselling training, no one ever told me how to manage money in the context of a relationship, and ultimately it's a small part of it, but if we can help build a holistic village around housing, job support, health, disability services, healthcare, and decision-making around money. So these vulnerable people in society don't borrow money from cash converters and loan sharks and these horrible people that, and to some extent banks with credit cards that prey on people on the streets so they can make better decisions with money. It's a holistic thing that we need to focus on, but most of these reports don't focus on that issue because it's not necessarily acute, yet the biggest cause of homelessness is usually sparked by a loss of a job, which then rolls into financial management and what people have to do in terms of desperate decisions around having to feed their kids, having to clothe themselves, having to get their kids to school, having to repair their cars, and then the choices they make around how they fund those decisions when they have cash shortfalls. And that really has a huge impact. And I think that councils like us and the government has a role and responsibility to help educate people and community about how we can make those decisions easier for people and get better long-term outcomes. It's a small component which is not looked at enough in my mind, but I think it's a good report and I enjoyed reading it.
Thank you. Councillor Simic.
Thank you. I feel similarly concerned about some of the findings in the submission that we've put forward or plan to put forward, particularly looking at some of the rooming house closures and accommodation closures in our municipality. Over the last 3 years in particular, there's been some significant steps backwards. Put that together with what we heard before from the officers regarding the In Our Backyard strategy, I think it's fair to say that we are at a crisis point. So I look forward to working with other councillors to look at options for us as a council to do more, to involve ourselves in our backyard strategy and to look for opportunities to resolve some of these circumstances. Certainly, we're not the only ones that have a part to play, and this is calling on the state government and the federal government to do more. At a federal level, raising the rate of New Start is a really important step in the right direction. There's much more investment that needs to happen there. At a state level, we are underinvesting not just in housing but also mental health support, and the two unfortunately also go together as particular circumstances that play out in people's lives to make their lives much worse and in many instances spiral out of control. So I'm glad and I hope that all of the councillors will support this submission tonight, and I hope that that means that all councillors are signed up to us working together to work on the solutions as well.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. I'll also speak to it just briefly, but what we do know about homelessness and those that are homeless is it's really complex. There's no single thing that is a silver bullet, but we certainly have identified, and as everyone said, affordable housing, but there's also family violence and obviously poverty and a lack of adequate income, which sort of goes back to what Councillor Pearl, I think, said could be some of the root causes. But what we know about homelessness is that it is increasing. It's actually not going away, it's getting worse. And in a city, and City of Port Phillip is in a city, it's actually getting worse in the inner city areas. Rough sleeping is increasing faster than other forms of homelessness, and since 2016 it's increased by over 50%. And older people are the fastest growing cohort of people experiencing homelessness. So, you know, I just wanted to also put my 2 cents in so that I fully endorse this interim submission. Thank you. Councillor Gross, would you like to close? No, thank you. Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll go to item 10. 10.1, which is Move, Connect, Live, Parking Management Policy, the outcomes of engagement and the adoption of the policy. We have one person that's requested to speak to this item. Mr. Peter Russo, please. Welcome. So if you pop on the microphone and state your name and suburb, please.
Peter Russo, Lake Wards and Kilda West. Thank you for having me. In reading through the policy as such, I realise it's only policy at this stage, but the devil's in the detail. These visitor vouchers can be misused pretty quickly. If one resident can buy 4 or 5 books of vouchers, then they've got 5 parking spots for the year. If how are you going to control my use of the vouchers from the point of view I might want to use 2 of them at once if I've got a plumber and an electrician there after a storm, right? Can I have 10 vouchers in operation at once because I'm running a party? And so on and so on. So we're going to need to get some rules around all this. Now, we don't obviously want a parking officer running around looking at these vouchers one by one and making sure the number hasn't been used before and blah, blah, blah. All that stuff's got to be sorted out. On the car-free, the way the areas have been drawn up, I'm not sure all the areas are car-free enough. The area I live in is Area 22, and I'm a little bit parochial, but Sunday morning when you're running a triathlon or you've got anything at all happening in Catani Gardens, especially if there's a bit of a closure at Beaconsfield Parade, if I can park at the Middle Park Hotel, I've done well. And I live near Cowdroy Street, so I suggest that the people who sponsor those events pay for a parking officer and they go around and enforce the time limits, because you never see anybody getting booked. And you can see cars opposite my place in the 1 hour zone for 4 or 5 hours while these triathlons and things are on. On the crossovers, you've got rules about crossovers and so on, and depending on what's available on my property, I won't get as many vouchers as the guy next door. There will need to be maybe an appeal process for crossovers, because as I see it, I've got a crossover at my place, but it leads to a place where I can put 3 push bikes, but I definitely can't put a car there. So you're going to take one of my permits away because I've got a crossover, but it goes nowhere. So those sorts of things need to be thought about. And there's talk in the policy about a computer system to manage all this stuff. That's fantastic, but I would suggest we get into bed with 1 or 2 other councils and share the costs rather than have the ratepayers get milked. That's it.
Sorry, can you explain that?
So we don't want to go out and build our own wonderful wheel called the system to manage the vouchers, right, and spend heaps and heaps of money into the IT industry. We're not there to sponsor them. Let's get into bed with some of the other local, particularly in the councils, who will have similar issues, and let's share the one system and save money.
Thank you, Mr Russo. Some of the councillors may take up those questions that you've asked, so thank you. Okay, councillors, your turn. Any questions of the officers? Councillor Crawford.
I'm happy to take up some of those questions. So obviously, as we were said, the devil is in the detail, but there are parking systems like this around, well, if not Melbourne, Australia. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We are looking to work with systems, both the electronic ones or systems that have been applied before. Is that not the case? And we will be looking for ways of ensuring that the system won't be cheated. Is that part of the thinking that we're doing?
Through you, Madam.
Mr Bartels, yes.
A bit closer. Through you, Madam Mayor, in terms of the existing system and using, I suppose, what's available in the market, that is something definitely we have already pursued with our parking technology systems. And the proposal here in terms of the voucher system and investigating and pursuing electronic permits is definitely to use existing systems and modules that have been developed for other councils and to use them for our purposes in terms of in Port Phillip. The second point, in terms of, sorry, do you mind repeating the second part of that question?
I just wanted to ensure that we, as part of these new processes, we will be trying to make sure that people can't cheat the system and buy endless vouchers.
Through you, Madam Mayor, a change that's come from the draft parking management policy in consultation to the updated policy that you have before you for consideration includes a maximum number of vouchers that any property can have. So previously we went out with a draft with a maximum of 360 over a 12-month period. What we're proposing is to have a maximum of 60 available to purchase every 2 months. Once that is exhausted, they can't apply for any more until the next 2-month period in order to, I suppose, they choose how to use them and give them that flexibility, but in terms of the overall allocation, it's been used.
Mr Bartels, in relation to that, what happens if a resident wants to buy it from the lady next door that doesn't have a car, wants to buy her parking tickets? What things are in place to sort of manage that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, in terms of the pursuing and investigating electronic permits, that is definitely one of the benefits of that system in terms of vouchers. It enables only registered users and eligible households as a result to be able to access those vouchers. And again, it comes back to the previous point in terms of should a household use up to its 60 vouchers over a 2-month period, it will not be able to purchase or use any additional ones as well. So it prevents misuse, sharing and misuse, as well as encourages judicious use of the permits that they have or the vouchers that they have available.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Bond?
Just further to that, to ensure the voucher is used correctly, does that mean the visitor's car details have to be registered against the voucher?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we are currently pursuing discussions with a vendor at the moment in terms of electronic permits. It is envisaged that that is the mechanism, that the eligible household will input the details of a vehicle and register that. As to how that's done in terms of the mechanics and steps, I can't necessarily comment on that as yet. Every system's slightly different. But we are looking at a variety of ways that they can happen, whether the person is using it online, over the phone or via a smartphone app. A smartphone app provides obviously the greatest degree of security in terms of people download the app, are able to use it and access it, and then can't necessarily share that privilege or login because it relates to their smartphone. But we are looking at all those mechanisms and safeguards as well.
Have we made an estimate of how many additional staff members are going to be required in order to manage this new system we intend to introduce?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we haven't specifically looked at any changes to staff at this stage in respect to the introduction of vouchers, but we do see that there are definite administrative efficiency benefits in terms of moving to the electronic permits, as well as the potential to avoid paper and use as well.
Mr Bartels, I've had quite a few queries about this policy also looking at changing parking restrictions. Are you able to confirm that that's out of scope for this policy?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I can confirm that the changes to specific parking controls are outside the scope of this policy.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford?
I just want to ask, are there other cities that have done this before us, whether in Victoria or somewhere in Australia that you know of, and it's been a successful program where they've adjusted their parking policies? Or are we the first cab off the rank to do this kind of policy change?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we would be one of the first in Australia in terms of pursuing demand-responsive pricing, which I think is what you are alluding to, Councillor Crawford, but is not necessarily uncommon more widely out of Australia. There are a number of cities in North America, Europe, as well as investigating from other areas of New Zealand as well that are either have it or are pursuing it as well.
Mr Bartels, I've been asked the question, what if I have 2 crossovers to my property, say one at the front and one at the back, and both are streets? What would be my entitlement?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the way that the policy proposes to calculate that is by looking at the width of that driveway and then using that to deduct from the maximum number of permits that household is entitled to. In that instance, having 2 driveways would equate to the removal of 2. However, it is dependent on whether they are an existing permit holder or a new applicant, how they would be treated. there are provisions or transitional arrangements proposed within the policy for permit holders as of the 1st of July 2021. If they already have permits in place, they wouldn't necessarily be affected by the change or calculation of driveways until the 1st of July 2025, in part to reflect the lead-in time required to prepare and adjust to those changes coming from the policy.
I'd also like to take up another question that Mr Russo asked around an appeal process for crossovers. I think he's referring to there's various types, widths. It perhaps didn't feel it was very clear in terms of what the outcome should be. Are you able to identify what options are available to residents should they have a grievance?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, I can confirm that as part of the changes made in response to community feedback on the draft parking management policy, there was an addition of a exemptions or review clause added to the policy, which enabled exceptional circumstances to be considered on a variety of grounds, and that is where I suppose nothing necessarily in the City of Port Phillip is perfectly at right angles or according to the latest codes, to then provide a mechanism for those to be considered and to be determined appropriately.
I have one last question. In the recommendation, at 3.3 it says we thank the community for participating in the community engagement activities. How are we going to be thanking the community? Will it be via email, or is it just the fact that this is in the recommendation?
Through you, Madam Mayor, in part it is through this resolution and this chamber, but we also have, through this project, developed a relatively large database of contacts. It is subscribed for updates, so we're looking at somewhere between 600 and 700 people or email addresses. So that would be the primary mechanism we would go back to those people to advise them of the decision made in terms of this matter, as well as publicising it more broadly online and through our web pages and website as well.
Okay, so any further questions? If not, Councillor Crawford has indicated she wants to move, and seconder, Councillor Gross. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to the motion?
So we live in an area... They keep turning on themselves off tonight. We live in an area that is pretty much set up to be walkable, and we are the envy of many areas in Melbourne that would love to be able to walk to public transport, walk to our shops, walk to our bars, walk to our restaurants. It's great for us. It's healthier for us. It helps us to decarbonise. If we're walking places, we save money on taxis, on cars, don't have to drive them as much. And it's good for supporting local businesses. There's many more benefits. So when it comes to parking and driving in our city, we can't keep just doing what we've always done. And it's true of many things in our life at the moment. We've got to change how we do waste, how we capture water, how we use energy. The list is endless. But it's about thinking collectively. Parking is one of those areas where we've got a system that, as it currently stands, is no longer practical for the circumstances of our city. It's like having software that no longer can deliver the outcomes that you want, like things ensuring that there's a spare parking spot if you want to go to the shops when you do have to carry things, or making sure that people are not cheating the system. I like to think it as like wearing a pair of shoes. So as your feet grow, you can't keep wearing the same pair of shoes and expect to be able to walk and do things that you would normally do. And it's kind of like that. We have a footprint for parking in the City of Port Phillip, but the people, our feet, are growing. And so we can no longer just do what we always do and hope we can fit it into the same shoe. We have to buy the new shoe, we have to adjust, and we have to wear those shoes in. So it will be a little uncomfortable as we get used to the change. But the great news is that we're doing it over a very long period of time that you'll barely notice. But at the end of the day, we'll have a shoe or a parking policy that is more fit for purpose to deliver the kind of outcomes we want for our city. It'd be very irresponsible if we didn't. So I'm asking my fellow councillors to support this policy. It's not perfect, no policy we make is, but we do actually have to encourage a different kind of behaviour and thinking in our city. And the idea is also that to encourage people who don't need a car to not use it, so the people that do need a second car or do need to drive more and park more can actually do so more easily. We're growing, our feet are growing, we can't keep wearing the same pairs of shoes. So please adopt this policy.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Gross.
So I am going to do my usual thing. I was the mayor the last time we had a major parking reform, and it was incredibly conflictual. Tonight we've had one speaker. Why is the difference? I think there's two things. First of all, there is a realisation that parking is a scarce resource and needs to be managed and sometimes rationed. And secondly, I feel that the officers have really managed the consultation with a degree of sophistication that has meant that people feel that they've had a say. So I just want to do a quick fly through the key issues and mention the degree of consensus that this has achieved. First of all, we're going to go for the residential parking areas. That'll mean that parking choices will be less restrictive. Clearly, a good thing to do to give a bit more flexibility. 62% of those who participated in our survey support the proposal to implement this particular proposal. The second one is the maximum number of resident parking permits for households take into account off-street parking. Key feedback was that this was supported. It is a difficult thing for a tier of government to try and persuade people to use their off-street parking. I know in my street it's not used a lot because it's inconvenient or it's storing 3 generations of unused furniture. But people understood that this was an important reform. 61% of those who participated in the survey supported it. Having a tiered pricing for resident parking permits, once again, 61% of those who participate in the service support the proposed tiered pricing structure. And key feedback was providing that the first resident parking permit was going to be much cheaper than we are suggesting in our package of proposals. But let me say this, and I'm speaking to a whole lot of people who aren't here, there will be a lowering of the price of the first car parking permit. And that's, I think, an important win for those people who are concerned. And that should be, my suggestion is that that should be part of our conversation. This isn't just about a tax grab. This is about a sophisticated package that gives some wins to car owners. We've already talked about the single-use short-term visitor parking vouchers. That's an idea that attracted 60% of support. These are really significant numbers. The single-use short-term foreshore parking vouchers, 59%. Demand responsive time controls and pricing to manage car parking availability. I reckon that's a really important reform. You know, there's nothing more sort of alienating than in the middle of winter seeing an underused car park being the same price as a popular beachside car park in summer. So if we can get on top of the demand-responsive approach to pricing and time, then I believe that's going to be a really significant reform, and one that we'll only see played out over the next decade, particularly when we get new technology in. We only got 53% support for that, which surprised me, but I think it's because it's a new idea which we need to build support for, because I think it's a good one. So I just want to finish by saying congratulations to everyone involved. There's been a lot of difficult conversations, and yet we're seeing no real riot that we absolutely saw 15 years ago. So the conversation's been handled delicately and with the sophistication that I admire. Some of the proposals are genuinely radical, and the support is genuinely there. So I support it, and I urge everyone else to support it. And well done us.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion or against? Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The reason there's no one here tonight is because this proposal contains no specific direct changes that are going to impact people immediately. It's got lots of suggestions and motherhood statements, but the reality of what we do here as a council is that no one really cares what we do until we try and take away their parking permits and try and remove the parking from out the front of their houses, take away their car spaces, tell them that you're going to lose your permit because you've got a driveway. Then they will come at us with pitchforks. And it's then that we will feel the wrath of the decisions we're making tonight from the residents who, at this point in time, everyone's in favour of, the person in the next street driving less, the person down the road giving up their car. Once it becomes about them, we will then we'll get some very strong feedback, I'm sure. I won't be supporting this because I think we've made our parking policy and our parking management way too complicated. We've got voucher systems for the visitors and removal of residents' rights to park outside their own homes based on whether or not they have driveways and things like that, which is just not going to go down well. We're creating a lot of work for bureaucrats and not actually addressing the supply of parking. One thing that has annoyed me during the 7 years on council was that every time we get a developer come in with a proposal, we give them a parking dispensation for the car parking numbers they're meant to have, and we waive the visitor parking requirements. If we wanted to decrease congestion on our streets, in areas where it's growing, we wouldn't give dispensation for car parking for apartments, and we'd ensure they have enough visitor spaces to cater for their visitors, tradies, all those other things, which is what's causing the congestion on our streets that we're now trying to implement a policy to try and address. I'll note in here that most of these changes won't come into effect until July 2021, and the political pundits in this room will notice that we've kicked the can down the road until after the next election. We're not prepared to introduce any of these changes prior to the next election because every one of these councillors knows exactly what would happen if we tried to do so. So I won't be supporting this. I don't think it's good policy. I think it's way too complicated. And I think we need to make our parking system much simpler than we're going to make it if we adopt this policy. So I won't be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Would anyone else like to speak for or against the policy, the motion? No. Councillor Crawford, would you like to close?
Yeah, I would. Well, we wouldn't have kicked the can down the road. It just has timed out that this is where it's at. And actually, the big decision is now. It's hard to make policy that is more fair and equitable than the system that came before it. And over 5 years, that's plenty of time for you to adjust your behaviour. Councillor Bond sort of indicates that perhaps our residents aren't smart and informed and wanting to make change and understanding of the complexities of living in a densified city. If we don't, all we will get is more problems for our residents. We've got more younger people churning through here on a regular basis in and out of flats. There has been a decline in younger people buying cars and using them because there are share cars and there are alternative ways to get around. You know, the driverless car may be on the horizon in our lifetime, I don't know. But things are changing. The way we get around is changing. So I think that it won't be easy. I have no doubt. There will be some pushback when it comes to some adjustments, but is it also fair that someone who has access to park off the street gets just as many car permits as someone who has no car space off the street? It's a much fairer system, and I think that most people will see the equity in it more than the adjustments. And I look forward to our residents working together collectively to realise the problem and work just like we are with climate change, just as like we are with waste, and looking at ways to make our community better. And parking is one of those areas that we need to do better. And over the next 5 years, I look forward to the community working with us with these slight changes that will build up to make a fair and more equitable system. And as I said, the shoe no longer fits. And if we were thinking that we could keep doing what we've always done, it would be irresponsible. So I really hope, councillors, that you support this policy.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. I will now put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried.
Division required.
Councillor Bond has requested a division, so councillors, I'll ask you to vote again. All those in favour? That's Councillor Copsey, Councillor Simic, Councillor Brand, Councillor Voss, Councillor Gross, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Deputy Mayor Baxter. All those against? Councillor Bond and Councillor Pearl. That motion's carried. Now we move on to 11.1, which is the Port Phillip EcoCentre Concept Design Public Consultation. And we've got two people that have requested to speak. I'd like to ask Dr. Elizabeth Fenwick to come forward, please. Welcome.
Elizabeth Fenwick, I'm Vice President of the EcoCentre and resident of Elwood. It was more than 9 years ago that the President of the Port Phillip EcoCentre highlighted to Council the ageing condition of the current EcoCentre building and its lack of suitability to continue to adequately meet the burgeoning needs of the EcoCentre's operations and the Council's expectations. As testimony to the valued partnership of the EcoCentre with the City of Port Phillip and our ongoing close collaborative working relationship, Council has committed $2.75 million towards the funding of a new building for the EcoCentre. We are very grateful to the Council for this and for our progress to date, which has resulted in the development of a concept design for the new building. Jointly, our organisations are seeking matching funding from the state government for completion of the proposed building. Ideally, this will enable the rollout of the project as a single stage to completion. The possibility of developing the building in 2 time-separated stages is possible, but less desirable in that, firstly, there would be more disruption to our programs if the EcoCentre were to relocate twice. Stage 1 would not allow for any significant improvements in our capacity to meet current and projected increased unmet demand or expand our offerings. Stage 2 might be a long time coming and in the interim further inhibit meeting community needs and council goals. And Stage 2 build would add two-stage build would add significantly to the overall cost of the project. The EcoCentre celebrates this joint achievement and is excited to witness the release of the concept design to the public for comment. Recently, the EcoCentre celebrated its 20th birthday with more than 2,000 people coming together to join in the celebration of our important milestone. We are buoyed by this show of support from our community and look forward to meeting the increased demand in the community and on this exciting new chapter which we are about to embark upon together. The contribution which the EcoCentre has made to the environmental and human well-being in this city over this time has been significant. Now, with the escalating urgency to provide practical approaches to alleviate ongoing environmental degradation and address escalating climate emergency outcomes, the positioning of the work undertaken by the EcoCentre is more poignant and increasingly important. With the recent declaration by Council of a state of climate emergency, the EcoCentre is optimistic, is well positioned to offer professional advice and support Council to meet some of the objectives that will begin to emerge from within this context. The announcement of this new facility is well timed. We are confident that upon full completion of this much anticipated development, the EcoCentre will be enabled to provide support to the community on climate change mitigation and support the Council plans and goals in this area, provide heightened strategic ability to secure funding externally to input into the City of Port Phillip, and expand programs to teach young people and adults about the environment and to support the well-being of residents and contribute to the enjoyment of welcome visitors to our city. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fenwick. April Seymour, please.
Good evening, Councillors. April Seymour, Executive Officer of the EcoCentre and resident of East St Kilda. Thank you, Councillors, for your investment in the community. There's no more pertinent time for the EcoCentre to scale up the community's role in urgently reducing waste, potable water use, pollution and emissions, and while protecting biodiversity and community health during extreme heat and floods, smoky air, and compromised water quality at our beaches. As a bonus, we generate $3.2 million local economic value according to Council's independent economic report. I want to thank you tonight as we welcome the next step closer to a fit-for-purpose EcoCentre, providing Council's first building at the 6-star Green Star sustainability rating, which is world leadership. Although we tremble at the scale of the response demanded for a safe climate, we are bolstered by the thought of the next EcoCentre chapter. If together, Council and community have sparked 250,000 plus volunteer hours from a 1960s cottage, and that excludes our affiliate group volunteering. It excludes, before we even consider the volunteering we've nurtured in their early stages, such as the Earth Care Penguin Guides and Beach Patrol Australia, which now goes to 35 beaches around all of Melbourne. If we did all of this in the 1960s cottage, imagine what is possible in a room with proper classrooms, training and meeting spaces, a citizen science lab, nature play nooks, and staff space where we aren't 18 staff sharing 8 workstations, because some of us have significant wingspan. We are not simply thanking you for updating a council building. We are thanking you for the critical impacts it delivers to community. We are thanking you for the school groups and kinders who come, learn leadership skills, learn about the local environment facts and technologies, and often cut their waste and emissions by up to 50% and increase biohabitat by doubling it on their campus as a result. We're thanking you for tripling the future capacity of our repair cafe with the Jewish Ecological Coalition each month. We're thanking you for the families holding zero waste birthday parties, the ALV plant-based cooking demos and community shared meals, Earth Care Penguin Guides being trained, the land care groups from across Victoria who come to strategic planning, the regional meetings of Metropolitan Waste and Resource Recovery Group when Melbourne's councils come together at the EcoCentre. For nature time for kids at risk of homelessness, joining Launch Housing's playgroups at the EcoCentre. For the venue for Melbourne Water's consultation with Melbourne's major 5 Indigenous language groups who chose the EcoCentre as an appropriate meeting ground to plan for healthy waterways together, waterways that all ultimately end up in Port Phillip Bay along our iconic beaches in Port Phillip. We're thanking you for the volunteers who report 100% feeling more connected to the local environment, 85% feeling a greater sense of happiness, and of course, taking on and sustaining new behaviours. We can't wait to welcome you, your children, and your neighbours to the new EcoCentre. We support this concept design and look forward to the community consultation process together. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you, Ms Seymour. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for this or something different? Councillor Simic to move. Councillor Brand to second. Councillor Simic, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. It's very difficult to speak after the last two speakers spoke so eloquently about the importance of taking the next steps in this project. I really hope that we can see shovels in the area much sooner than what's potentially expected, because it's so important that we get on with this project. So I won't say much more except to endorse what's been said and really hope that all of us councillors can do what we can at a, partnership level to call for our partners to step in and really support the full development of this project, and if not, for us to look at opportunities to get shovels out there as soon as possible.
Thank you. Councillor Brand.
Yes, I'm quite excited about. I'm very excited about this. I think this is a really great little project, and I just want to emphasise how much it's needed, mainly because of the incredible success of the EcoCentre over the years, and its volunteer numbers alone, the amount of volunteer work that it actually generates is just astonishing. And in terms of leveraging community participation, work done in all sorts of ways, services given, it is an amazing generator of value to this community, all happening out of that little house. And this project, to me, speaking as an architect, I think it looks really great. It looks lean. It's modest. It seems very efficient. I think it looks really great. I just think it's probably what an EcoCentre should look like. It's smart, and I think it's going to do all of those sort of things, not just house the place, but also symbolise it. So I symbolise its sort of its ethic. So I think it's really quite an exciting prospect here. So I'm very much in support of it.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else? Councillor Baxter.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. The EcoCentre is obviously one of the sort of jewels in our crown in terms of what they provide to this area. They've won so many awards. I've looked at the wall of awards, and it looks as though the shelves are about to collapse with all of the different kinds of things that are on there. They're nationally recognised and internationally recognised for the work that they do. The benefits are apparent for all to see, and I just think that this organisation absolutely deserves a fitting home for the work that they do that allows them to continue that into the future. It needs to have a really great Green Star rating because of the nature of the work they do. I'm personally still hoping that funding will be forthcoming from the Victorian Government to allow us to do the one build rather than a staged approach, but I understand why a staged approach may be necessary if that funding doesn't come. But I'm still racking my brains as to why the Victorian Government doesn't see the value in assisting with funding with this amazing organisation. But let's just hope that they can come through. We're strong in our commitment, and we're very pleased to put this out there for people to have their say.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Bond?
Yeah, I won't be supporting this on the basis that we should not do any consultation on projects such as this until we have guaranteed funding. As Councillor Baxter mentioned, there's still a $2.75 million shortfall. We're waiting for the state government to come to the party, and they've failed to do so. Council and governments generally love to consult. It keeps bureaucrats and consultants in permanent work without actually having to build anything. It also creates community expectation. When we go out there and consult on a project like this, everyone expects something to be built within a fairly short time frame, and often, as I've found during my time on council, that's generally not the case. We've got things like the Carlisle Street Structure Plan, Fitzroy Street Structure Plan, St Kilda Triangle Orange document from 2012, St Kilda Triangle Purple document 2016, Bay Street Structure Plan, Lagoon Reserve Master Plans, all the Gasworks Arts Park remediation consultation. We did millions and millions of dollars worth of consultation that we've done, and nothing has actually happened with those because they were all unfunded at the point in time where we went in and did all the work. This bookshelf, this organisation also has bookshelves full, and they're collapsing also from all the outdated and unrealised consultations that we've done here of every description, not just the EcoCentre, but planning across the board. We love to plan, we love to consult. We very rarely realise many of what it is we do because at the time we commence, it's all unfunded. We should wait until this project's funded and then do the consultation so we know exactly what our budget's going to be and we actually have something to consult on to a budget. We should certainly just not consult until we have a plan, because without the funding we will never actually realise this, and this particular consults and plans will join the bookshelves full of all the other things this organisation spent money on and not actually realised, which is a great shame. So I won't be supporting this until it is funded by the state.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Would anyone else like to speak for or against this motion? Councillor Simic, would you like to close? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried.
Division required.
Councillor Bond has requested a division, so I'll ask you to vote again, councillors. All those in favour? Councillor Copsey, Councillor Simic, Councillor Brand, Councillor Voss, Councillor Gross, Councillor Crawford and Councillor Baxter. All those against? Councillor Bond and Councillor Pearl. That motion's carried. Thank you. Now we'll move to item 12, planning. So, yes. So 12.1, the Conservation Management Plan for St Kilda Public Library. And councillors, we don't have any questions that have been raised from the public. Do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Bond.
I left this off my list of unrealised plans as a result of consultation. I came across about 6 months ago a set of plans that were about 5 or 6 years old, or maybe even older, for a redevelopment of the library, and those plans are sitting on the bookshelf with all the other ones I mentioned earlier, never realised. Are they going to form the basis of any or a starting point for what it is we're proposing to do here with the review of the library?
So we've got the wrong item up on the screen. I think we're on 12.1.
So 12.1, which is the Conservation Management Plan, has that changed? Oh, okay. I will do 12.2 because that's what I intended. It's just a different numbering on my sheet. Apologies. We will go to 12.2. So the Conservation Management Plan of St Kilda Public Library. So I'll just repeat that. Councillor Bond has asked a question. Mr Sarankov, are you able to answer that one? Or?
Certainly. Through you, Madam Mayor.
The St Kilda Library, it's a great facility, but one that hasn't had a significant upgrade in over 20 years. So at some stage quite soon we'll need to have a good hard think about what upgrade may be required. However, at the moment we're waiting for two key things. One is the library service review, and the second one is a workplace strategy. Until we've got the outcomes of those, there's little point in going too deep into designs and thinking up grand ideas for that library.
I'll rephrase my question. I came across a set of plans, and I don't know how many years old they were, but it showed our current library, it had a cafe in the middle, different entrances, things like that. Are those plans going to be used as part of this once we eventually decide what it is we're going to do here post the library review?
It's clear this is not a development, this is about the heritage conservation of the library. It's a different thing, isn't it?
I'm fully aware of that, Councillor Crawford. Thank you.
Councillor Bond, can you tell me how it relates to this item, that question?
Well, we're talking about what we're going to do with the St Kilda Public Library. Does that not involve what we're going to do with the public library?
No, this is retaining the heritage and conserving the current building, not so much the development of it. Mr Sarankov, are you able to answer that question, just to put us out of our misery?
Through you, my Mayor. When we're at the stage when we've got clear direction to proceed with advancing any designs and thinking for the future of the St Kilda Library, we'll be reviewing a bunch of documents, including any designs that have already been prepared.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else got any questions? I have a question. How does this plan differ to the previous Level Chen document? Has it significantly deteriorated? Are you able to address that?
Madam Mayor, the key difference between the original plan and the current one is this: the current plan has just had the benefit of time. So a substantial amount of time has now passed, and with fresh eyes, the facility's been re-looked from a heritage perspective.
Any further questions, councillors? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for this or something different? Councillor Copsey to move, Councillor Crawford to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion?
I would. Thank you. I found this report fascinating. I really enjoyed reading this. The library obviously occupies an important kind of civic function, and I think it's really fantastic that the proactive step has been taken to update the conservation management plan. But just generally speaking, you know, it's one of those reports that you come across, and in reading through it was a real pleasure to actually note some of the really important architectural history of the library, which is interesting in and of itself. I note that it was quite rare and special that the original architect of the library was able to contribute to the consultant's report shortly prior to his passing, which is really special, and I'm very pleased that this has been undertaken in time for that to have occurred. But I think also I thought it was wonderful to see the extra social importance and the history of how the St Kilda Library came to be sort of recorded in this report. So thank you very much for preparing it and bringing it, and I think it's a really interesting document for anyone to have a read of because it speaks to not only architectural significance but the social significance of this library in our municipality.
Councillor Crawford?
Yes, it's a social history that I loved, and I didn't know that. I love to hear that a determined group of residents campaigned long and hard in order to get this particular library in our municipality, and it goes to show that there have been good progressive people campaigning for great things in our city for a very long time, and thank goodness they succeeded. And so I'm very happy with this conservation management, but particularly the story of how it came to be.
Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Brand.
It's a great report. I think in answer to Councillor Bond's questions, a report like this is really important to look at what we've got before we start deciding what to do with it, because we have a building which is heritage of great local heritage significance, and we really need to understand what we need to do with this building. It's designed by at two different times with two different sets of architects, really fantastic architects. Enrico Taglietti was an amazing architect in Canberra after he migrated from Italy to help design Parliament House. No, he was much before then. What did he come for? Something, anyway, doesn't matter. He was a real character and an amazing designer, and he came down and did this amazing building, which I think throughout most of its life people haven't liked very much, which is a real. It's one of those things that when people have a vision and who really express it with a great power and purity, a lot of people don't get the vision and find the power and the purity just really hard and difficult to accept. And unfortunately, it never got fully built, so it never quite came to its full fruition. And then another great lot of architects came in 1993, whenever it was, to complete it in a sense, but they sort of overrode it and messed it up in all sorts of ways. And those architects, ARM, actually specialise in messing things up in interesting ways. And they're completely incompatible architects. And we have a building which has two, well, especially Taglietti's stuff, but I think ARM stuff is pretty amazing too. Two sort of overlays of really quite important and high quality architecture not sitting very well with each other and not doing very well. And I think this report says, let's respect the fabric in this building, but we can do stuff with it. And it is actually a reasonably empowering and enabling document, I think, that would encourage us to put a third layer in and not get too pristine, not get too prissy about what we can and can't do here, but do it with awareness and respect. But this is actually, I think, a reasonably enabling document that said there can be a third layer without losing too much and maybe gaining a lot more. So it's an important step. I think it's a fascinating document, the whole thing, and it's a sort of thing that, you know, we all need to read before we do anything on any building like that, because it's just so enriching and deepens our understanding and tells a great social history and makes us appreciate our local environment and our city and the things that we actually have something to do with, especially here in council.
Councillor Gross.
Oh, look, I'm going to vote for this report, but I'm pretty disturbed by some of it because I hate the Taglietti stuff, and I hate it. It's called brutalist architecture for a good reason. The Ashton Raggett McDougall stuff is fun and delightful, and so we've got a building with two characters. I'd take a bulldozer through the left half of the building as we look at it, but this actually says don't do that. I respect that.
Thank God.
I respect that, even though it is ugly as sin and offends my particular aesthetic.
It's not all about you, Dickie.
It's not about me. If only it was.
A lot of people want to put a bulldozer through you.
Some very mean things are being said here. Anyway, so let's vote for this and recognise it for what it is, which is an expert report on an incredibly interesting multi-charactered building.
Would anyone else like to comment? Then Councillor Copsey, would you like to close?
I just wanted to note, I think we may have the wrong recommendation up on the screen. Sorry, I might just wait. I won't comment on Councillor Gross's particular aesthetic and add to the comments tonight.
Huh? It's a bit confusing, Consultants.
Oh, okay.
Well, we can talk about the officers'
3.4 is different. Can we just hold for a second? It's just a little different to what we've got in our papers. There's only 3.1, 3.2 and 3.3 which was moved by Councillor Copsey. Yep, and seconded by Councillor Crawford. So just confirming, that's fine. Councillor Copsey, have you...
I'm just on the wrong report now. Let me go back and make sure 100% that it's... Yes, that was what I intended to move.
Terrific. Okay, so now I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll move to the other one in planning, which is the Amendment C142 Port, which is a review of the HO6, St Kilda East. We're considering the recommendations of the Planning Panel report and the adoption of the amendment. There are no members of the public that have requested to speak to this. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for this? Councillor Brand to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross. Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to the motion?
I probably shouldn't have volunteered for that because I have to admit that I haven't read most of it. But it's a fairly weighty document. But I undertake to do that.
No one's watching.
I undertake to do that over the next few... Yeah. But this is I've been watching this evolve over a period, and it is it's a fantastic effort what we've done, and well, I might close, but I'm very happy that we're putting it up now and it's set off for review.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak?
I just want to say that these are delicate conversations because they touch upon people's homes and they touch upon heritage, and I'm a heritage addict. Some might say an ignorant heritage addict, an opinionated and misguided one, but it's very important to me. These documents are very important. I just want to highlight the really nice way our officers dealt with the community, because some of the community would come in concerned about what this meant for them, and I just think our officers did very well in conversing with them, and it is a testament to their charm that we have no one here talking tonight. So these are vast projects looking at the building fabric of thousands of buildings, and they're not easy to do, and I commend the officers for their work and look forward to it being passed.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Brown, would you like to close?
Yes, I just need to emphasise I have read the officer's report. I haven't read it's what I haven't read is all of the attachments, which is
a voluminous.
How you can check, double check, and recheck all of these things in such incredible detail over the period of time, I think is really an incredible effort by the author of it and the team around him. It is fantastic. But heritage is such an important part of our city, and I think everybody that chooses to live in the city of Port Phillip is living here partly because of the incredible built environment that we live in and service and heritage protect. And these documents like this are the foundations upon the entire way that we maintain our city, and the city that we deeply love and deeply understand, that it's the history, the beauty of this city that depends on these giant, dryish sort of documents to get it all right, to get the protection of the city standing on legally and academically credible assessment of their value. And I think everybody's property value is dependent on the heritage. You look at Albert Park, which has got the highest property values per square metre in the state, and it's because it is such a gorgeous, beautiful environment that has been protected by heritage protection. It's one of the main reasons why it is so desirable and so beautiful. And in a sort of way, I see heritage as sort of socialised beauty and socialised history, in a sense that they're our streets. They're all owned mainly by individual people who own beautiful houses. It's wonderful for them to be owning those beautiful houses. But everybody in the city can claim it as our street, our streetscapes, our shops, our places, our parks. And this is protecting the beauty and the utility and the history of all of our city for all of us. And putting fairly sizable constraints on the actual property owners who own the bulk of the buildings, who benefit for, I think, the sort of social compact that we do protect it with heritage protection, but it's obviously a big constraint on their scope of action as property owners. But I think it's something which we generally freely enter into and feel pretty happy about, and all benefit from the results. I just think this is it's a classic policy for a council, for a community, and it's been incredibly well executed and carried forth and carried out. So I'm very happy that we're doing it.
Terrific. All right, then we'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Terrific. Great. Right, now we're moving on to number 14, which is organisational performance. That's right. And the first thing up, yes, which is the Assembly of Councillors. No members of the public to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Pearl has indicated he wants to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross to second. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Pearl? Councillor Gross? Then I'll move. Would anyone else like to speak? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Yes, so councillors, I'm going to move the next 4 items en bloc. So under clause 52, we are able to do that. And accordingly, I would like to seek a councillor to move the motion that the following items be moved en bloc: 14.1, 14.2, 14.3, 14.4 and 14.5. Councillor Pearl to move that and Councillor Bond to second. I'll put that. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Great. Now we'll move to item 14.6, which is the proposed tenancy agreements of Gasworks Arts Park. And we have one speaker that's requested to speak, Ms Tamara Jungworth, if you would come forward. Welcome. Pop on the microphone, please.
Good evening, councillors. And My name is Tamara Jungworth, Director and CEO of Gasworks Arts Park and resident of St Kilda. I'm speaking to support the recommendation tonight and to publicly note the fantastic collaborations that have been underway recently between Council and Gasworks Arts Park. Some examples are the 44-bin decal campaign in Victoria Avenue late last year in Albert Park, the theatre seating, which is currently being upgraded, the new outdoor photography exhibition featuring images of the Port Phillip area, which will be mounted on canvas on the inside of the Pickles Street brick wall, and also exciting conversations around including the work of our resident artists in the park upgrade. These lease arrangements progressing forward give us the confidence to grow our business and improve the service we're offering to the public. Examples coming soon this year include a brand new website, a brand new online ticketing system which will be optimised for mobile phones, and a new time-lapse video showcasing the 5 new options our retractable seating system will offer to artists. At the recent Midsummer Festival, we presented 50 performances and were the major hub in the city of Port Phillip and indeed in Melbourne. We achieved a 22% increase in attendance from last year. And some of you here will have enjoyed the wonderful production of You and I, which blended the artistry of trapeze, circus and dance. The Midsummer Festival director said Gasworks Arts Park's long-term commitment to programming of the highest standard within Midsummer is recognised and greatly appreciated by Midsummer, and this year's program hit new heights in terms of breadth, richness, depth and quality. Coming soon at Gasworks Arts Park is a celebration of International Women's Day with 2 timely and relevant productions, one focusing on the change prominent Australian sportswomen are bringing to our society, and the other a dramatic comedy called Hard to Reach Places, where a mid-30s mother grapples with having it all while still keeping relatively sane. We're looking forward to working together with council staff to finalise the lease documents and continue to provide services to artists, audiences and our community. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Ms Jungworth. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? There are none. So we have a officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Copsey to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Crawford. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion? At the end, Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to the motion?
I was one of those councillors that saw You and I, and it was an exceptional highlight at the Midsummer, and so I look forward to this lease going out and look forward to the continued collaboration with Gasworks and the excellent programs that have been there in my time on council.
Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Copsey, would you like to close?
Thank you, Ms Jungworth, for coming and speaking tonight and for the overview of some of the great collaborations that have been occurring. We know that Gasworks is an incredibly valued place in our community, and so I'm pleased to see the next step being taken to secure the lease arrangements for the next period of collaboration. May it be fruitful and creative.
Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So next up is the proposed tenancy agreement for Linden Art Gallery, and we don't have anyone here from Linden. Councillors, do you have any questions for officers? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Brand to move. Councillor Baxter to second. Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I was at the Linden board meeting on Monday night, and everybody there was very pleased with the progress now being made with this new long-term lease. I know that they were discussing whether they should come here and tonight and make a statement, but this particular stage of it is a pretty routine stage. It's necessary because it's over a certain value and outside certain parameters that it just needs to be publicly advertised, and we are doing that. I guess it's more notable what we're not doing, which is putting the lease out for a complete open expression of interest to the open public, which everybody then has to compete to establish who would be the owner of it. I think everybody is incredibly relieved and grateful that that isn't happening, mainly because it would hardly it could hardly actually change the situation that we would have with Linden. We would still be trying to have an independent group of people performing council services for them, and at the moment this particular board, which has been going for 20 years or so, have been doing a very good job and an ever increasingly good job. What we will do is we will be revising and strengthening the KPIs that are attached to the funding deed, which attaches to this lease, and all of the things that council needs Linden to do and to pursue and to improve on and to aspire to can be pursued through the KPIs. The new property policies that we're developing at the moment have a very, very clear set of criteria about what should go to an expression of interest and what should be negotiated with the current lessees, and this one fulfills that test, and it's a very sane and rational way of doing it, because it's about 5 or 6 different layers of criteria about ultimately whether it's serving the public interest to do it this way or to do it the other way, and each test has to be passed, and it's rigorous, and it's all based on questions fundamentally about the public good and about public process. So this is actually part of a really good process that everybody's very happy about and very pleased with and grateful for, and Linden itself is so looking forward now to eventually getting a long-term lease that they can actually flourish. And instead of, well, I've been on the board now for 3 years, and I reckon almost the whole time it's been taken up with lease agreements, lease negotiations. It's been so difficult, all for good reasons, and now we're getting just near the end now where we can actually see some clear water ahead and plain sailing and doing the job that they're there to do. So we're very happy with, well, this is one step in the process that we're very happy with there.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Baxter.
Look, I won't. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I won't go on for too long, except to say that I've had a number of interactions with Linden to discuss various different things about possible proposals for creative stuff in our city, and every single time those interactions, I've just been blown away by their professionalism, their understanding, that they're absolutely across their brief in essentially everything they do. Basically, doesn't matter which member of that organisation I speak to, they all seem to be across it. In fact, I wonder whether our esteemed Councillor Brown might even be the weakest link in that respect. I say with love. But you know, they're a wonderful partner, and I'm very, very pleased to continue working with them.
Would anyone else like to speak on this item? If Councillor Brand, I assume you don't need to speak anymore? No? Then I'll put that motion. Oh, you do? No? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now, councillors, just looking at who's left to speak tonight, and we have 3 people wanting to speak on the decision on voting methods, so I'm going to bring that forward to talk about next, and then we'll have a quick break, and then we'll do the rest of the meeting. So the next item is 14.11, the decision on voting methods, 2020 general election, and Mr. Dan Peel, who would please come forward. Welcome. Have a seat. Turn on the microphone. If you could state your name and your suburb, please.
Good evening, councillors. Dan Peel, Port Melbourne. I'm here representing the ratepayers of Port Phillip Association, ROPP. ROPP implores councillors to vote in favour of postal voting tonight because results from the past 3 elections since 2008 across 78 councils in Victoria have shown that postal voting has a greater turnout of voter attendance. Informal voting is also lower with this method. In 2016 council elections, the average statewide voter turnout for postal elections was nearly 74%. Attendance elections was worse off at 61%. For the same election year, the lowest voter turnout for all councils was the City of Port Phillip at 48%, which used the attendance voting system. A casual observer might ask the councillors in this chamber tonight how they claim to represent the community when less than half of the community voted. The attendance voting system also favours resident ratepayers and dissuades non-resident ratepayers for whom they must reside too far away to attend the polling booths, and because of this they don't vote, as it's not compulsory for them to vote. Unlike some other councils, along with the fact that non-resident ratepayers are generally not aware that they are allowed to vote in more than one municipality when they are also voting in the same municipality, in their own local municipality. In 2016, there was only 11% voter turnout for non-resident ratepayers. One can only read into this that some councillors prefer this low turnout and choose attendance voting because this gives them some electoral advantage while democracy goes out the door. Prior to the last election, council officers here recommended postal voting, but the motion was not supported by most councillors. Had the majority of councillors voted for postal voting, then we would have had a stronger voter turnout and a more democratic result. Cost efficiencies of $117,320 would also have impacted on our core services. I challenge any of you to reach in your pocket and find that money. We would like to remind the councillors of the following information presented to them by their own council staff. The election objectives and principles of the Victorian Electoral Commission Local Government Election Services are to aim to deliver fair and equitable elections and high quality value for money products and services. Let's just say fair and equitable. It will provide high quality election services and will work to provide every voter with a quality and convenient service in which to exercise their democratic right. Let's just say quality and convenience. Councillors should consider the information presented to this report on the types of voting, participation of the community and the costs of elections to determine the method of voting which is most likely to achieve maximum participation of candidates and voters in the electoral process and delivery of an election in the most efficient and effective way. ROPP wants a more democratic result for 2020 elections, and this can only be achieved, in our opinion, via postal voting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Peel. Christina Sirikoff, please. Welcome. You might need to turn your microphone on, I think. Yep, is that better? That's it, yes.
Thank you. Good evening. I am Christina Sirikoff. I live in Middle Park and I am a member of the Ratepayers of Port Phillip for residents and ratepayers. It is rare in an Australian election to have a government that is voted in on by less than half the population. For the 2016 election, when you were all elected, City of Port Phillip had a 48.6% voter turnout, the lowest in Victoria. This makes Port Phillip the least democratic council in Victoria, and this is a disgrace. As you're all aware, postal voting in Victoria resulted in over 70% voter turnout at the last 3 council elections. Attendance voting is consistently inferior, with much lower voter turnout as well. Port Phillip is one of 6 Victorian councils, of which there are 78, that still have attendance voting. This is because the previous council voted to keep attendance voting before we had the 2016 election. I note that only 2 councillors here tonight were in the previous council. Councillor Voss, who voted to keep attendance voting, and Councillor Bond, who voted for postal voting. Councillor Voss, this is your opportunity to demonstrate that you have the community's best interests at heart when you vote tonight. Points to support postal voting are: 1, you will have better voter turnout and a more representative council. 2, the result will be more democratic. You will save $117,000. You will finally join the majority of councils in Victoria that have postal voting. We, the ratepayers of Port Phillip Group, support postal voting so that's a better outcome for everybody in this municipality, whether you are a resident or a non-resident ratepayer, all of whom pay and use the amenities of this area. Those who are non-resident ratepayers have businesses in this area and also have the right to vote and make it easy for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Sirikoff. Ms Brenda Forbath, please. I think the microphone is on, so you're right.
Thanks. Thank you, Brenda Forbath, Community Alliance of Port Phillip, and I live in Elwood. The Community Alliance of Port Phillip has always supported attendance voting, and looking at it from a candidate's point of view, it is certainly a lot easier for a community candidate to stand for council when we have attendance voting, because postal voting involves large mail-outs to voters, and that's a very expensive thing to do. And most community candidates are not supported by large organisations like political parties and don't have the funds to do those kinds of mail-outs. So from a candidate's point of view, and trying to get as many people to stand for council, leaving and having the option to stand for council, I think attendance voting is going to be more encouraging, I think, for community candidates. There's also no certainty that postal voting will increase the voter turnout. I have seen the figures in the report, and certainly attendance, the turnout of voting in City of Port Phillip is not good. But as I said before, there's no certainty that postal voting will increase that turnout. It's interesting to have a look at in the report at 4.6.4. Where there's an explanation or two explanations for why voter turnout is low in the City of Port Phillip. And it's pointed out that 25% of voters on the roll don't have to vote, as they're non-residents of the City of Port Phillip, compared with 12% on average in other councils. So that might help to explain some of the difference between the City of Port Phillip and other councils. The second argument that is put forward in the report at 4.6.4 is that the City of Port Phillip has higher levels than average of renters compared with other councils. And 5.7% of voters on the state roll were still enrolled in the City of Port Phillip, but no longer living in the municipality, and they hadn't updated their details. So those are two explanations that the report puts up, which I think are quite significant. I don't think the decision should be made on cost alone, and certainly from the figures presented in the report, there could be some dollar savings going to postal voting for the council, but that has to be weighed against the capacity for candidates to participate. One point I just make in closing is that the costs for attendance voting could be reduced if the pre-polling voting was reduced from 4 weeks to 2 weeks, and that could constitute a saving for council and for the VEC. So I'd urge council to retain attendance voting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Brenda. Ms Forbath. Any questions, councillors, of the officers? I'd just like to ask a question, if I could. What would be the reduction if what Ms Forbath has just said, we were to reduce the time for attendance voting into 2 weeks rather than the whole 4 weeks? Is there an estimate of what that might be?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we would need to make contact with the Victoria Election Commission and seek their advice on that. I would note that under the legislation, the Electoral Commission is required to have one pre-polling centre open from the closure of nomination date for that 4 week period. So there's only the ability to vary additional centres, so it is a current requirement of the regulations.
Thank you. Also, are you able just to outline what the Local Government Act, where that is going in terms of the voting methodology?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the draft Local Government Act is currently before the Parliament. We understand that it is scheduled as item number 2 on the business of the Parliament for tomorrow. Under that bill, there will be a standard method of voting that is determined by the government. The current legislation allows Council to determine the manner in which it would like to conduct its election. However, if that bill is passed, that will be mandated by the state government.
And will it be mandated postal voting? That's the current draft.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it doesn't stipulate the method. However, given the majority of councils are currently undertaking postal voting, it would be reasonable to suspect it will shift to postal voting.
And so if it does shift to postal voting, whatever we decide here will be our last opportunity to influence the next election. Or is it possible that we make a decision tonight that might be attendance, for example, and then the legislation's changed to postal and we will be required to change? I'm just wondering how may this play out?
Through you, Madam Mayor, depending on the provisions by which the various legislative changes, so depending on the dates that are passed, if you passed a vote for attendance today, and if tomorrow the legislation is passed, this decision could well be overturned by the legislative change. It will really depend upon the time frame for implementing this particular provision, which is not known at this point.
Councillor Brand?
So I'd just like to get a clarification on one of the statistics which was mentioned by Ms Zirikov. She cited the figure of, I think she said it was 11% of the people on our CEO's list, or maybe I'm putting words into her mouth, only of the people who are on the CEO's list, which are the absentee landlords and a fair few others, who are eligible to vote, and so they count on the. Do they count on when we look at the? First of all, are those voters taken into account of when we do the proportion of people who voted?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct. They're counted in the overall 90,000 odd voters and counted as 11.69% turnout.
Okay, so the question that I just want to clarify with you is that's 25% of our voters roll in that category. Only 11% of them vote. How does that compare with councils with the CEO lists in other councils, which are postal votes? When it's a postal vote, at what rate do those people on the CEO's list turn out to vote?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'd need to take that particular figure on notice to respond. The statewide attendance level is 13.53%, but I don't have the figure on postal attendance, sorry.
That's the overall state thing. And could I ask then, is it a fair, a reasonable sort of thing, since the vast majority of councils are postal votes, so that would be close to what the voter turnout would be from CEO lists in postal voting communities?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I would be unable to predict that particular figure. What I do have is a Petro Giorgio report released in 2013 did determine that there's a higher attendance of CEO list voter turnout in postal voting.
Yep.
Any further questions, councillors? Okay, well, if not, we have do we have a motion? Councillor Baxter?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move that Council determines that attendance voting will be the method used at the 2020 general election on 24th of October 2020.
Okay, so just to be clear, that's the existing motion up there, recommendation, but we're just popping in the blank, so attendance. Okay, do I have a second? Councillor Crawford to second. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to the motion?
I would. We've had these discussions before, and I remember attending the meeting a few years ago where this was last determined. It's very easy for people to misunderstand figures as they are quite complex in this sort of sphere. So the fact that we in a municipality have this inflated electoral roll because of a bunch of people who don't live here but have an entitlement to vote here can be quite confusing for people, because no other level of government has that. You can't vote in one state electorate and also another state electorate because you happen to own a business there or something like that. So it can be a little bit confusing. But basically areas that have a high amount of absentee landlords or investors or business owners, all of which count for inner city areas such as the city of Port Phillip and Moreland and Yarra, who also have attendance voting, they have an inflated list, and therefore when those people don't vote, and they don't vote very often, turnout looks very low. However, if you were to take them out, you would see that turnout is actually approaching what it looks like in the rest of the state. You also need to take into account that, as has been said, we have a highly sort of transitory population. People move in and out of Port Phillip a lot, and that's true also for inner city areas. So as people move around a lot, they will often not update those details, and so they'll be stuck on an electoral roll somewhere where they don't actually live, and then have to go cast a declaration vote elsewhere. So all of these things combine to, I think, give the impression of a very, very low turnout in inner city areas. And because a lot of inner city areas use attendance voting, it can certainly make it look as though attendance voting is what is responsible for that. But certainly digging deeper shows that that is not the case. I have heard that I've heard people say that attendance voting is undemocratic. That would be a surprise to anybody who's ever voted at a state and federal election. To me, that's the most democratic thing ever, is to go down with everybody else and interact with your community. Go get a democracy sausage and maybe you're lucky and there's a cake stall as well at wherever you're happening to go. Get your a how to vote card, perhaps even the candidate will be there to talk to, and you can ask questions. You can ask questions of the people handing out the how to vote cards as well. It is this exercise in democracy, and that is an amazing experience. And I know that not everybody can do that because of they may have accessibility issues, or they may have other reasons why they need to perhaps cast a postal vote. But the casting of a postal vote means that they're not able to experience those other elements of the democratic process, and the postal voting process, unless you're a very dedicated postal voter, can often become a tick and flick exercise, which I think is actually very anti-democratic. So I don't see any particular reason why we should want to support moving to a system that would be so different to the other levels of government that we all participate in democratically. I don't buy the argument about cost. Proper democracy always costs something. I mean, the cheapest option is to not have elections, but we want to have elections, so we need to pay for them. So that's why I believe that we need to continue our tradition of attendance voting so that people can make proper informed votes and go and interact with their community. I do think that the postal voting process puts another barrier in between people interacting with the people that they may be voting for. And one of the ways in which the candidates can bridge that barrier is by paying a lot of money to mail things out or print things and put things in letterboxes, as opposed to simply being present at a booth and greeting people themselves. I worry that that would encourage those with the most money to feel that they should have more of a right to participate in that process. So for all of those reasons, I think that we should stick with attendance. I am fully aware that the Local Government Act in Parliament at the moment may well strip our ability to make this decision for ourselves, but at the moment this is our decision, and I think that this is the decision that we should make.
Thank you. Councillor Brand, you can, yes, an amendment? No, I can before the...
Okay.
Councillor Crawford, as you're the seconder, you need to speak first.
Am I right to speak? Yeah. As I said, as has been mentioned, this may be a moot point, but I am in support of attendance voting for numerous reasons. As was said, we live in a very high renting population, so the turnover is quite high. But the other disadvantage is that many people are locked away in inaccessible apartment buildings, and it's very hard to buzz and connect with people. So I do think that there is actually, it's really important to give that accessibility of candidates on the day or in early voting access to voters and vice versa. So I think that attendance voting does overcome some of that. Again, the expense, being able to mail out to lots of different things, it makes it a very exclusive exercise and does not encourage people to run for government. Not only that though, even putting things in mailboxes when people are locked away in apartment buildings doesn't guarantee they read them these days. So actually reaching people in our municipality as an electoral area is very difficult. Postal voting is more open to rorting and sort of dummy candidates left, right and centre. So it actually isn't a fair representation of, and it's much harder to track, fair representation for democracy. When it's attendance voting, you know the people that have been out campaigning and doing the work, and you know who haven't. The thing that I want to mention here, as I was looking back at the figures over the last few years, the reason, a huge reason, I believe, personally, that we had such a low turnout well, comparatively, if you dig deep in the figures, it's actually not that low. Does anyone remember Election Day in 2016? It was the coldest, wettest, most miserable day that I can remember in a spring ever, and literally no one came out. And I look at Yarra, and they also had a low turnout at attendance. The day itself, the weather, if you weren't really engaged, you lived in a flat, you didn't know who anyone was because it's not very well advertised, and it was cold and wet, you just wouldn't get out there. It really, literally was. I think I handed out more in early voting than I did on election day because it was such a miserable day. So that's one of the big factors of the 2016 election, which was lower than previous years, but the weather itself was beyond horrible. I think attendance voting, everyone says they want to, we never get to engage with council, and it's actually really hard to reach you folks. We try and reach out. We want you to engage, but so many people don't. So attendance voting is one of those opportunities in the City of Port Phillip to reach out and be involved in the process and have your say. I think that's the most democratic way of all.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Brand, you have an amendment?
Yes, I have an amendment that I would like to propose.
Would you please read it?
Which attaches point 3.2 to that's the current motion, which is that Council writes to the State Government to request that it reviews the local government electoral regulations to amend the early voting period to commence approximately 2 weeks after nomination day to align with the voting timelines of a postal election.
Do we have a seconder for that, once it gets up there? Councillor Smith to be the seconder. And if we could add to the beginning that council, please.
Oh, I see, yes. That council writes to?
That council writes to the state government. You did say that, Councillor Brand. Okay.
Okay, that's it.
Councillor Brand, you could speak to your motion.
Look, this is just a minor
amendment.
A minor amendment to what we're already voting on, but it just if we're going to vote for attendance voting, which we will see who votes, but whoever votes for attendance voting, I believe it would be better if we could be voting for a form of a program of attendance voting, which actually is a bit more ideal than what it is now. The one real bugbear with the system that we have now is that the moment nomination day has finished, people are encouraged to go and do early voting, and it means that candidates have no time. For the first time, at nomination day, that's when you know who's running and who isn't and what the situation is with the candidates and who you're running against, and there's no time from that to the next morning to prepare all of the material that you need. In fact, I might just... I think I'll read this out, it'll be just faster. Commencing early voting immediately after nomination day places an unwarranted burden on candidates, especially less well-resourced candidates, to finalise preference negotiations, produce relevant communication materials, including how-to-vote cards, develop and distribute policy materials, and organise campaigners to attend early voting booths before voting for candidates begins. B. This encourages electors to cast their vote before having the opportunity to access the full range of information and interaction they may require in making a fully informed decision. And C. It imposes an unwarranted cost burden on the city for opening fully operational polling booths for an unnecessary length of time. And I think it's worth noting that with the postal voting model alternative, and with in except for there's one little wrinkle in it, but generally speaking, the postal voting that you can do as an augmentation to the attendance attendance voting, you can't do that until you get the materials to vote with, and they come according to the timetable on October the 6th, which is 2 weeks after nomination day. So I can't see any possible reason why attendance voting would start, early voting would start earlier than that. Nobody needs anything more than that. If you can't vote within that window of 6th of October, the 23rd of October, well, you've got every opportunity to do a postal vote as well. So there's no practical reason for it, and it would be just a much more fairer and ultimately more democratic situation that if we space the timing out. It's a minor thing. Obviously, it's not going to get up if we don't vote for attendance, and even if we do, it may well be overridden by the state government in the next coming week when they say what they want to do. But I just thought it was important that we articulate a form of attendance voting that we can aspire to as what I believe is the best and most perfect way of exercising our democracy in local government.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Simic, would you like to speak? Would anyone else like to speak for or against the amendment? Councillor Pearl.
Speak against it if possible, because I think it's dodgy. I don't think there's any situation you can say it's a more democratic process where you're shortening the period in which you can invite people to go and vote, and it's against any core principle that we use in Australian elections, particularly at the state level, which have similar pre-poll voting periods. Effectively, what you're asking people to do is give you more time to go away and do dodgy deals for your preferences and arrange yourself so you don't have to stand on a polling booth for an additional 2 weeks. Self-interest never astounds me, but I think as a group of councillors we should vote against this. If you go for an attendance election, give people the maximum amount of time where they can come and exercise their democratic duty. So as a team, let's vote this down.
Would anyone else like to speak for or against? Councillor Bond.
I'm going to exercise that self-interest as someone who has spent, I think, 2 weeks for my first council election and then 4 weeks my second council election and then 3 weeks running for the state, standing on a pre-poll. I very much support a shorter as possible pre-poll. It was. You just stand there for 3 days doing nothing. And that was the council one. So I'm going to support Councillor Brown's amendment. In the unlikely event we wind up as an attendance council, I very much support a 2 week pre-poll as opposed to a 4.5 week pre-poll at 3 town halls with multiple entrances and all that other thing we had to put up with 4 years ago.
Councillor Baxter.
I'll support this amendment. I will note that if Councillor Pearl chooses to support postal voting, he might find that the postal voting period is as short as the period that is being proposed by Councillor Brand. So postal voting doesn't start the day after nominations close. So if you say that any shortening of that voting period is a travesty and dodgy and all of that sort of stuff, then postal voting would have the same effect. So I think this is just about aligning those voting periods, and I think it makes sense.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Brand, would you like to close? So we're voting... Oh, no, we don't. That's right. True. So what we're going to vote on now is just the amendment, the 3.2. So, councillors, I'll ask you, all in favour? All against? That motion is carried. So that now becomes a substantive motion. And we've had Councillor Baxter and Councillor Crawford speak to the substantive motion. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Brand.
Yes, I'm speaking in favour of attendance voting. Not that I think that postal voting is undemocratic, but I think it's... I think attendance voting has certain features which encourage democracy and support democracy better than postal voting does, and I think it's very worth the money. And especially with I thank Councillor Bond for supporting that amendment, because I think that is common sense, and I encourage Councillor Pearl to vote for attendance voting, because it does give actually the longest. I'm not supporting attendance, I'm just supporting the yes. No. Anyway, I'll leave that aside. One of the strongest arguments put against attendance voting is that it seems to turn out very small attendance figures. And I just want to say a couple of things just to put that to rest. I believe that looking at the statistics, that the reason for particularly low attendance voting, leaving aside the weather, which I agree Councillor Crawford has reminded me of, which must have had a spectacular effect on that very particular and strange day. But one of the main reasons is that cities like the City of Port Phillip and the City of Yarra, which both have attendance voting, have a particular demographic profile, very particular characteristics, which make getting a high turnout much more difficult than in other cities. And I would attribute the low attendance, the apparently low attendance in the City of Port Phillip, to other characteristics, or characteristics other than whether it was attendance or postal. There's only a small difference between attendance and postal voting across the board when they're compared with each other in the state, and at least two of those small number of attendance voting cities are actually the City of Port Phillip and the City of Yarra, which for our own reasons drag the general figure of attendance voting turnout down. So if it wasn't for us two weird ones, I don't know what the figure would be, but the comparison between attendance and postal voting would be much, much closer than it is. So that's one reason. I think that sort of, it means there's not nearly as big a difference if you allow for these particular characteristics. Well, the characteristic is that 25% of our voters' roll is the CEO list. And I'm actually not unhappy that there is a CEO's list. I think there are lots of people with a stake in it. I suppose for a sort of a left-leaning person like myself, I shouldn't be saying that absentee landlords have the right, like everybody else, to vote, or even two of them per property or whatever. But I do think that there is an argument for it, and because they do have a stake in it. But they have a deplorably low level of attendance on election day, or doing postal voting or doing early voting. They only 11% seem to turn out, and across the board, across the state, in all the CEOs lists, only 13% turn out. So it's just it's a phenomenon, which I think because for most of them voting isn't compulsory. They don't live in the city. It's not compulsory. They're not particularly interested, and they're not particularly interested in doing it. The trouble with the City of Port Phillip is that 25% of our list is made of those people, as opposed to half of that, which is the average. So that gives the City of Port Phillip, in its 90,000 people who are eligible voters, about 10,000 of those are absentee landlords who will not come and vote. So that's a difference between us and the average. So we've already cut out 1/9 of our possible voters from the equation. Then we've got, that would make quite a big difference. We also have the other side of the coin for the absentee landlords who are not particularly interested in doing it. There's the renters who rent their properties. Some of them, the City of Port Phillip and the City of Yarra, who are inner city cities, have a very, very high itinerant rate where people come in for short amounts of time and leave. It's where people flit through the city of, the metropolis of Melbourne. They do it this way. They change addresses. They move through it in much higher numbers in the inner city than they do in the average city. So that actually means that a lot of people who are registered here who have long since gone somewhere else, that's a large proportion as well, which means that it's to do with our normal social characteristic that they don't turn up to vote as well. There are also, amongst permanent renters in the city of Port Phillip, there is a widespread misconception that because they're not ratepayers themselves, that they can't vote. It's very hard to get the message across. The community group that I've been a member of for 20 years is built on the idea that renters are citizens and have equal rights to vote and equal rights to the city and what have you. And it is very, very hard to get that message across to a lot of people who just think because they rent, they probably can't vote. So there are at least three reasons, and there are other ones I've got, which are just social, demographic, cultural, psephological reasons why we don't get a high turnover. If those factors are taken out of it, you'll find that the city of Port Phillip is just as engaged politically as any of the cities around in the state, and you will find also that attendance voting isn't much worse than postal voting. So that's only part of the whole argument for attendance voting, but I just want to put that one to rest. I've got a whole lot of other people have mentioned, the general sort of cultural things. I don't think that we'd be looking at federal government saying we'll save money by changing attendance voting to postal voting. It would change the whole sense and the theatre of democracy, the celebration of democracy that election day is. It's a sort of a bit of a party, it's a bit of a chore that we all do together and maybe grumble or maybe love it like I do. It's something which is, it's a ritual about one of the most important things in our lives as citizens that I think is a beautiful thing. The democracy sausage in a certain Australian way represents so much. It puts it up there with the weekly visit to Bunnings. It's something which is a really important part of our cultural life, and I think whereas postal voting is it's just like paying a bill. It's just nothing much to it. It's something, yes. It's so much better to go and get your hardware in your hand rather than have it delivered by post. Anyway, okay. So there's a whole range of reasons. I really believe very strongly in attendance voting because I think it's a beautiful thing, and I think that so much of what is said against it is actually not all that valid.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? Councillor Bond.
Yeah, I'll speak against it. I'll be supporting postal voting. Apart from the lower cost to council of about $110,000, the higher participation rate by about 10%, and a lower informal vote by about 5%, there's other reasons why postal vote is a superior system. I remember I was here this time 4 years ago when we made this decision. Myself and one other councillor supported postal, and everyone else supported attendance. And I said to those councillors after the event, I said, you've just caused yourselves or cost yourselves any chance of being re-elected. I said, what we're going to wind up here is a council chamber full of Greens, and that's not going to be a good outcome for Port Phillip. And it turns out I was right on both counts. The independent councillors at the last council election got completely wiped out. Every one of us who sits here, we're all members of political parties. We're members of the Liberal, Green, ALP and the CAP/ALP. So none of us are truly independent. We're all backed by someone who ran. And this system of attendance voting definitely favours those that are backed by political parties, such as the ones we all are. I've heard that some people love the fact you can engage with the voters and the constituents on election day. Well, if you're waiting to election day to engage with your constituents, you're probably not going to get back in. So I don't buy that argument either. So I won't be supporting this. I'll be supporting postal voting. It's probably a moot point because the state government's going to tell us we're going to be introducing postal voting anyway. So, in the unlikely event we happen to do this, I definitely, as Councillor Brand's amendment, definitely support the shorter pre-poll, but we're going to be postal voting anyway, so I don't think it really matters. Thank you.
Councillor Gross.
I'm speaking against this. The fires of democracy do not burn brightly at local government level. You can't easily make an analogy between what goes on at federal government and state government and local government. And for every election that I can recall, regardless of the weather, the attendance of Port Phillip has been something that has been embarrassing. To get below 50% is not a good thing. And I've heard a lot of Orwellian, almost mendacious arguments about this sort of stuff. The grim reality is that on the CEO's list, there's a difference of 2%. It's not that significant. And what has been since the time Port Phillip has been created, we've always struggled to get to 50%. It's not good. And I think that 100 grand, it's in one sense it's not a lot of money, but it is money. And I think that the characterisation of election day, of this idyllic, bucolic scene where we all skip down to the electoral office, have a long, profound conversation with every candidate and make up our mind on the merits, is utterly misleading. Because what actually happens is that when you've got multiple wards with multiple positions up for every ward, there's 10 candidates, and we dive on these poor voters and they hate it. It's intimidating, it's absolutely threatening. And they walk in with nothing, they walk in angry, and it's... And they vote for Brand. and the characterisation that I've heard around this chamber of this marvellous celebration of democracy is misleading to my experience. And that's why I say, a lot of this conversation has been Orwellian. Everyone's talking about this exercise in democracy that's actually intimidating. The one argument I do want to pick up, the argument that it's cheaper to have attendance. From my personal point of view, that's not true. I will campaign in the same way, doing the same thing. Just because the final vote is a postal vote doesn't mean my campaigning will be done via postal votes. It'll just be the same old, same old. I'll try to door knock. I'll lie to my organiser about how much door knocking I've done. I'll have handouts that people won't get or won't read or won't care about, and I might just fall over the line like I did last time. So I just think this is a venal and naked self-interest that's by people who are part of organisations who are professional campaigners, and the arguments against it are not convincing, and I do accept that it is embarrassing that we, election after election, fail to get to 50%.
Can we just vote? Have you finished, Councillor Cross? Just taking a breath, or...?
No, I'm finished.
You're done. Okay.
I can see the antagonism around the chamber.
Anyone else like to speak?
This is probably a moot point.
Yeah, I'll speak.
Councillor.
You shouldn't laugh at your own jokes, and you certainly shouldn't cry when you're laughing at your own jokes. So apologies for my poor behaviour a few moments ago. Look, everyone that speaks here is all about self-interest. So what's that wonderful Jack Land, including myself, because I've got an unfair advantage over all of you, including the 3 Green candidates, primary Green candidates, and the 6 dummy Green candidates, and the hundreds of members that they have that turn out and do all the wonderful things that they do. I have a wife called Prudy and a sister called Gabrielle, who, I tell you what, Prudy can man 3 of those doors at Port Melbourne Town Hall better than 10 Greens volunteers can. And I was the only independent, in inverted commas, candidate that got the highest mark across the board. So, I've got an unfair advantage. So, in my world, I'm in a much better position having an attendance voting system from a pure self-interest point of view. And that wonderful Jacqueline quote in The Race of Life always back the self-interest. At least you know it's trying. But there's some facts we need to talk about in terms of fairness of information getting to voters. And the number one thing that people complain about when they come up to a polling booth is we don't know who you are, we don't know who you're backed by, we don't know if you're backed by CAP, we don't know if you're a member by CAP, we don't know if you're endorsed by CAP at this election or in the case of Councillor Voss at the last election, don't know if you're a Liberal, don't know anything about you. And the problem is when you run an attendance voting system in the past, is the voters get no information at all. So Brenda Forbarth's assumptions that she made are completely incorrect. More information goes out under a postal voting system to voters about who they are voting for than under an attendance voting system. And it really affects the little guy. So people that aren't members of CAP or COP or ROP or the Greens or the Liberals or the ALP are substantially disadvantaged, and we need less people that are involved in official political parties in local government, not more. We have enough as is. We need real people in council to make real decisions about real people in the community, not people that are endorsed by political parties sitting in council chambers. It's not a good outcome for the community. And it's not, well, I'm saying it's perfectly self-interest. The only reason I'm sitting here is because I have 2 wonderful campaigners and I stand for Liberal values. I don't think either of the 3 Green candidates would be here if they weren't endorsed by the Greens. If they were running as true independent candidates like the rest of us had to, I'm of the view they wouldn't have been elected. So what they want to do is the people here voting for attendance election, they want to get elected and they want you to pay for it. It's as simple as that. Voting should be optional at this election. If you look in New Zealand and places like that, optional voting schemes work in most cases better than the attendance rates in Australia. So let's get rid of the intimidation at the voting booths. Let's get more information out to people so they can have the time, the space, the capacity to vote on their terms and put that ballot into the postal box and send it back. It'll be interesting to see who gets elected next time. Hopefully there's less officially endorsed political party candidates at this table. I doubt that'll be the case. But you know, if you're an honest, independent person sitting out there that wants to run, give these people sitting here a go, because my God, we could do with some better people.
Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? Councillor Copsey.
I'm only going to make one very simple point that hasn't been canvassed already this evening, and that is that under an attendance election, anyone who wishes to vote postal can request a postal vote. And so in an attendance election, you actually maintain that choice for voters. I'll be supporting attendance.
Would anyone else like to speak? I will speak, but first I will say in the event that this fails, I'll be putting up a different motion being postal voting, because if it does fail at this point, we'd be sitting here and it will just go ahead as it is. But I will say there are 2 really important things that are important, and that is I want as many people in the municipality to participate in the process of who their local government elective representatives are. I want people to be informed and participate in an informed way. And I think it's been pointed out today that that's really difficult to do, and we do exist in a unique environment here where there is a lot of apathy. People are in buildings that you can't get access to, and and all the other reasons that have been mentioned. It's also really important that candidates feel it's accessible to them to become candidates, and it's affordable. And we want as many different and diverse people being able to run as candidates as well. So they're really important priorities and principles that I think we all should be aspiring to in terms of going forward. Now, what does that have to do with the voting method? Quite a lot, and I think we've heard, how it could be intimidating one way, expensive another way. How do you get in touch with all these people? So I have always favoured attendance voting. Personally, I enjoy it. I do think it's a very long time to be standing on the booth, and in particular if you're just a single person and you don't have a huge support group, it's very hard to man many booths. There's only one of you, so I think that is a challenge for many people, in particular independents that don't have a great party machine behind them. So I've always preferred that, but at this point in time I am going to put my vote towards a postal vote. And I sincerely hope that the decision to go to a postal vote, if that's where we end up going, and if that's where the government goes, does yield better engagement, more people coming, and a vaster, bigger array of candidates, because that's what we need. I'm not proud of the fact that we have a very low turnout. I'd love for more people to be engaged, but let's hope whatever we come up with actually delivers the goods, because that's actually what we need. So that's where I'll be putting my vote. Councillor Baxter, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So that's been quite a debate. I've been a little bit surprised by some of the things that are said there. It's really important to note, as Councillor Voss said, that what we're talking about here is a process. How do we design a process that is actually the best process here? So while some councillors have talked about the process and they've gone into great detail as to the pros and cons of the process, other councillors have talked about the outcomes. Other councillors have talked about Greens or their apparent contempt for their fellow councillors, which is wonderful to hear. Thanks, Councillor Pearl. But that's actually, the outcomes are irrelevant. If you design a good system, then I don't care whether we get a bunch of Libs, a bunch of Labor, a bunch of Greens, as long as it's fairly representative of the community that is voting that way. Mm-hmm. That's actually what we're looking at. So I find it actually quite scary to hear people arguing for a particular system because they think it will keep Greens out. That's terrifying. That's actually really, really sinister, and that is not how we should be designing our systems. The fact of the matter is that people will vote for the candidate that they think is best. There are independents on this council. Parties are useful as a shorthand to get an idea of what people stand for, but they don't have to be the people that are voted for. What I will say is that as a community candidate in an attendance election, your job is to get out there and talk to people and staff booths. And if you can do that, and usually with friends and family and stuff like that, and that's kind of a lot like how my first council run was. It was mostly just me doing it by myself, and that was totally fine. In a postal election, you need quite a lot of money in order to reach people that it's really difficult to reach if you don't reach them at the booth, and that means either mailing things out to them or using digital ads or something like that. And the only people with those sorts of resources are either the very wealthy or political parties. And people who don't have much money but have a good regional support base in their area will get squeezed out in postal elections under the weight of dummy candidates and huge spends by other campaigns. So there's been a lot of cynicism that's come from what some councillors have talked about here. They've all said, "Oh, we're all doing this in self-interest." Not particularly. I would probably have the resources to do quite well under postal. We're do mail outs and digital and all of that sort of stuff. It's actually any independent that wants to run against me that would probably be screwed by us moving to that system. So I'd like to point out that Councillor Voss, although we're supporting different systems here, actually talked about the system that we're talking about here and what process we're looking at. And I think that's what we should be focusing on. I'm going to close by saying I'm really very disturbed at some of the sentiments that have been expressed here, that it's all about self-interest, that we're all, just selfish and scrabbling for ourselves, that the best thing we should try to do is design a system that would keep those of our, opposition off of it. That stuff's scary. Don't consider that sort of stuff. I commend the motion.
Thank you. Now we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against?
Division required.
That motion has been carried. Councillor Bond has requested a division, so I'll put that again. All those for this motion: Councillor Copsey, Councillor Simic, Councillor Brand, Councillor Crawford and Councillor Baxter. All those against: Councillor Bond, Councillor Voss, Councillor Pearl and Councillor Gross. That motion has been carried. Now we're going to have a break because that went a really long time. So just after 9:20, I think, just 5 minutes, please. All right, councillors, we'll recommence, and so we'll just go back to 14.8, which is the mid-year 2019-20 financial review. There are no members of the public that have requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do we have a mover for that or something different? Any mover? Councillor Copsey to move, Councillor Bond to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I'm sorry to the officers. I'm sorry to the officers who've stayed. This is actually a very important report, and I really appreciated it and enjoyed reading it. I can see. I guess the headline from this is that despite the fact that Council has faced some really significant headwinds with unexpected costs and rising things that are outside of that are a result of outside forces, such as recycling crisis, such as actually, we often get accused of revenue raising through car parking, but we can see that actually revenue is starting to decline, and that's something we'll probably have to factor into car parking. So despite us having some changes, pretty significant changes to some of the forecasts, we've had some, actually had some favourable adjustments as part of our mid-year financial review. This is great news. We're still, operating to, I understand it, trying to have a very disciplined approach to our finances throughout this year, and I thank the officers for all of the support that they provide to councillors in order for us to maintain that discipline in the way we go about our budgeting. This is a fantastic document. I'm really proud that Council has such in-depth documents come to the chamber. I know that there are people who are very interested in Council's finances, and once again, I'd say here is a pretty comprehensive disclosure of where we're at, where that differs from where we thought we'd be at, and some of the reasoning behind it. I thank the officers very much for their diligence in preparing these reports.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Bond, would anyone else like to speak? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Now we'll move to item 14.9, which is the options for cultural and recreational clubs with liquor licences due to the reduced rates discount. Councillors, we don't have anyone that's requested to speak. Do you have any questions of the officers? Do we have a motion? Councillor Bond?
Yes, I'd like to move an alternate motion to the officer's recommendation.
Yes, would you like to read that?
Option 1, if we could change that 200,000 to 400,000. Yep, that's fine. There.
Thank you. Is that the only change?
Yes, that's the only change. Why are there two options up there? I'm not really...
So you need to...
Remove one?
Remove one of the options.
Yeah, so we could remove 3.2.
So can I have some advice on this, please? Is that right?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I can perhaps provide some enlightenment. The first option was related to the actual clubs that had sales of less than 30,000, and that's the figure that Councillor Bond has just proposed adjusting. The second option was basically for clubs that did not meet, so they had higher than 30,000 in sales. They then would obviously get a discount as well, other than not as big a discount as the clubs that were over 30,000.
So can I just ask a clarifying question? So that would then apply to every single club, regardless of turnover?
It would, based on them making an application or inquiring about whether we would work with them and provide the discount.
All right, now then I'm happy for option 2 to be removed.
Councillor Bond has just moved an amendment. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pearl. Councillor Bond, would you please speak to the motion?
Yeah, the purpose of this wasn't to give every club a break on their rates, but only the smaller community clubs. We do have a number of clubs in our municipality who are very, very well run, who are, they're full-time clubs. We all know which ones they are. Bowling clubs, angling clubs, that sort of thing. You can go down there, they'll be open any time of day or night. And they turn over vast amounts of money across the bar and are not impacted by the changes we made to our rates as some of the smaller clubs. The option I've got there, option 1, is for clubs like, and the one that initially raised it with me was Albert Park Bowling Club. They turn over $60,000 a year in their bar. I know we also heard from Port Melbourne Bowling Club, which turns over about $350,000, which is where the $400,000 figure come from. So those sorts of clubs who are not massive, they're not open permanently, they're genuine community clubs. This would apply to all our football clubs, cricket clubs, things like that, who turn over money across the bar, but they're not full-time clubs that are open 7 days a week till midnight, like Middle Park Bowling Club, St Kilda Bowling Club, the Albert Park Angling Club. So yeah, this is designed to help out those clubs. They all felt the rates rise that they incurred was, they felt it was a giant increase from they were getting an 85% discount went to a 25% discount. Some of them were hit by bills of $3,000 or $4,000, which is a lot when your club only turns over $60,000 per year. It was a massive increase in cost for them to try and recoup. So I think we got that policy wrong. This is going to give clubs not the full 85% discount, but only a 65% discount, and only clubs that are smaller turn over $400,000 per annum in sales across the bar. And any club that, once they turn over above $400,000, and we have a number of them, they will pay the rates as they currently exist for them. So that's the reasoning behind this.
Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak?
Sure, I wasn't actually going to, but I will. I'll just give you some rationale behind it. I was a little concerned when the number was put up to such a high level, but when I was disclosed the clubs that would fit in and around that level, I became a bit more comfortable. These clubs have an obligation to abide by responsible service of alcohol legislation and restrictions, etc., and there's an onus on these clubs to ensure that the social problems that are caused by excessive drinking, etc., don't or aren't promoted to a large extent in their premises, and I trust that those procedures are adequate and in place in these clubs, so they're not just relying on a small percentage of drinkers to produce reasonable amounts of club revenue, and I don't think, from what I understand from my relationship with those clubs, that they sit in that category. So I'm comfortable to increase it to a very sizable increase to the 400,000 level.
Councillor Brand, I'll allow you to ask a technical clarifying question.
I don't know whether an officer can give an answer, because it's something I need to know, but I've got to ask anyway. The change from 30,000 to 400,000 would seem to me to possibly have quite a large budgetary impact, if this whole topic has budgetary impact. I'm just wondering if there's any way of giving an indication of what this might mean, if you can give a guess, even.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Originally, when we looked at the 30,000 level, the estimate was between $20,000 and $40,000 because we weren't sure which clubs would apply, and also because we were unsure of a way of verifying at this stage the actual alcohol turnover of those clubs. This afternoon, based on the initial change that Councillor Bond put forward of the 200,000, we've increased that range from the 20,000 to 40,000 up to 20,000 to 90,000. My sense, based on my understanding of the clubs, on the 22, 23 clubs that we're talking about, I don't envisage that the addition up to the 400,000 will lead to a significant increase in that 90,000 maximum that's there at the moment.
Just a further clarifying question. The removal of option 2, does that have any repercussions from a financial perspective?
Again, through you, Madam Mayor, my sense is that because of where the level is now, it tends to make the option 2 redundant to a degree.
Councillor Baxter.
Sorry, I also have a clarifying question, and I apologise that that's not that usual, but this is a big change, and I guess I just want to get my head around it. How many... Do we know how many clubs roughly this would affect, and also how many clubs this wouldn't affect? As in, how many clubs make more than 400k over the bar in a year? Roughly, I know we're guessing with a lot of this stuff because that can change year to year. And how many make less?
Through you, Madam Mayor, without access to their financial records, which under our current processes they're not there was no need for them to do that previously. We really are just guessing effectively. Councillor Bond alluded to the 3 clubs that have actually made representations to council on this. There are 3 bowling clubs. Previously, when we brought this in 2 years ago for one particular club, which was the Melbourne Cricket Club, because of its size at that time, council wanted to go with that club first and then in this year to roll it across the other clubs. From that perspective, we don't have any detailed information to verify the actual alcohol sales. The 30,000 was, to be quite frank, was me sitting down looking at bowling clubs that I had some personal knowledge of and assessing whether that was a reasonable number to pitch this at. Obviously, based on the information that Councillor Bond has presented this evening, it would appear that that was well under the par.
Councillor Baxter.
Sorry. So just to clarify there, the 30,000 was a bit arbitrary because we're working in a low information sort of environment. I'd say the 400,000 is probably a bit arbitrary as well because it's just, it's who you talk to and stuff. So is there a way that we can have a sort of a more informed approach to this? Can we gather more data before making this decision so that we can better know the impacts before we make the decision? Because I honestly don't know.
So, Can we gather more data?
That would be a substantive exercise in contacting each of the clubs, and the time frame here is we're now in February and this is effectively through to June 30. In the interim between now and June 30, the commitment is to work with Council in actually coming back with something through using our community grants program that will potentially enable us to be much more informed and to target the discounts in a way which is more aligned with Council's overall rating strategy. This change occurred from Council's rating strategy of 2 years ago, which did focus on wanting to reduce dramatically the top-line discounts that were given to clubs with liquor licence who were getting an 85% discount, to take it down to just a 25% discount. It would be fair to say that we probably, as officers, have not managed that transition as well as we could have, and that has led to the situation where a number of clubs, particularly smaller clubs, were left with a significant impost in their budget for this year.
Councillor Pearl?
We were provided with a list of the clubs from memory in the original submission, so that the information isn't publicly available. Would you describe that this change is going to have a material impact on the budget position of Council?
The 90,000 worst case scenario in this financial year, if all clubs availed of the opportunity of the result of this proposal if adopted tonight, our estimate is that potentially it would have an impact of 90,000 to our revenue.
Councillor Simic, another clarifying question?
Yeah, can I ask about what documentation clubs would need to provide in order to qualify for this discount?
Well, obviously this will be a matter of public record after this meeting tonight if it's adopted. It's a manageable number of clubs to interact with. We have about, here in front of me, about 25. My team will be quite able to quickly engage. The actual proposal requests that they provide us with financial information verifying their turnover. That is probably what we would require based on the increase to 400,000.
Point of order, Mayor. Are we in clarifying questions or point of technical questions or debate?
We're not in debate. We're still in clarifying questions. Please make sure that they are clarifying questions, councillors.
If I can ask another clarifying question. I am confused by your statement just then because it doesn't marry up with what you said earlier, which is that it would be a substantial exercise to ascertain all of the information from the clubs. If it's only 25 clubs, could we not ascertain financial information from them first before we make a decision?
We could. I would think it would probably take us a month to 6 weeks to turn that information around, which would take us into the last quarter of the financial year.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford, a clarifying question.
Just maybe I tuned out the wrong point. It says up to 65%. So does that mean you would still negotiate if they are earning less than 400,000? It says a maximum. So does that mean that you would still it'd still be a sliding scale below that? So someone earning closer to the 400,000 would pay a higher rate than someone earning 30,000. Is that the thinking?
No, that's not. Well, the thinking of the two clauses previously was to differentiate between the bigger clubs and then clubs who were clubs who were over the 30,000 would get the 45% discount. Clubs that were under the 30,000 would get the 65%.
So through you, Madam Mayor, just to clarify, it wouldn't be up to, it would be 65%. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. All right, any further clarifying questions? Would anyone else like to speak for or against this motion?
I'll just flag, should this fail, I'll move the officers' rec, just so we don't get stuck.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Baxter?
I guess what I'll do here, given what we've heard about the budget impact and how difficult it would be to sort of get that information, is I suppose I'll I'll vote for this now, but it would be good once we get more data to review this to make sure that we're doing this right, because it does feel a bit arbitrary.
Thank you. Councillor Brand.
I've got to say I'm struggling to make up my mind on this, because I feel I'd give away $90,000 to if I knew it was for good cause and for all of the types of clubs that I'd like to support. I mean, I think it's a well-intentioned move, but I don't feel like I've got enough information. I just can't process who it's going to go to and in what circumstances. And I mean, in a way, I prefer to defer it until I could do that, because I'm not against it. It just feels like it's just such a huge leap that I don't know what to make of it.
Madam Mayor, can I propose an amendment, or have I already had my speaking time and can't?
You can propose an amendment if that's all you do.
Because I might want to propose an amendment that basically says let's come back to this in...
That's not an amendment. That's a...
No, that we pass this but we review it in some period of time, enough time that we need. Yeah, well, 3.2 is struck out. All right, so it sounded like the CEO was advising it. It
would be best to perhaps come back next year and review it as part of the rates. Anyway, okay.
Well,
okay, thank you. So we're in debate at the moment, and we've had a number of people speak. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Simic?
I'm also in favour, theoretically and broadly speaking, but don't believe we have enough information to make an educated decision tonight. I'm keen to review this in future, but really as it stands, I'm probably forced to either abstain from tonight's decision or not support it on the basis that as councillors I think we need to make evidence-based decisions, and we just don't have enough information tonight.
So I'll also speak for this motion, and so what the information that I know, and I've been following this quite closely all the way through, is based upon a couple of clubs, but in particular I know most about Port Melbourne Bowling Club, and I'll give you some information about them. They turn over around $350,000, and their annual profit is around $40,000. Of that $40,000, they also reinvest that back in the environment. For example, the most recent times, they have bought new chairs and tables. They put new lights in for the bowling green regularly, and they've got a program of events around that. They've put in $25,000 of green surrounds. They've bought $20,000 worth of bowls for children, because they've got quite a growing Bowls for Children program, and they've also recently spent significant amount of money on a children's playground in the bowling club. So if as that's over and above all the normal things like competition affiliation fees, data, phone, gas, electricity, refrigeration, etc. And also they're putting on full-time staff in order to make the experience of the club much better for their members. So they have that as their base. They're wanting to put more and more back into the club to make it a better environment. And if they have to pay $10,000 to $12,000 of rates, which is per annum, which is what was planned, that puts a significant hole in their program going forward. So I am supportive of this, that they still pay some rates, but not the entire amount. And that's what this particular option outlines. The Port Melbourne Bowling Club is by no means a big club, but it is an important club in the community, and it services a number of people. without them serving alcohol and making some money, they wouldn't be able to keep the club even open, because it requires so much work, and that's work that, you know, council's not going to put in for some period of time. So, yeah, that's why I'm supporting this motion. Councillor Bond, would you like to close?
Like you, Madam Mayor, I also get out and speak to the clubs in my ward. Very familiar with not just Port Melbourne, but also Albert Park Bowling Club, St Kilda Bowling Club and a few other clubs. I read their annual reports, so all the financial information on each club's available in those reports. So I'm not making a decision in a vacuum. I've had very strong discussions, particularly with the Albert Park Bowling Club. It's a club of about 100 members. 70% of their members are bowling members, as opposed to St Kilda and Middle Park that have a large number of social-only members. I think 50% of the bowlers at Albert Park are pensioners. It's a club that turns over, I think, about $60,000 to $65,000 a year across the bar. It doesn't open at nights. It opens one day during the week and then Saturday, closes the bar at 6 or 7 o'clock on a Saturday night and they go home. And as I mentioned earlier, they got a $5,000 rates bill from us on a club that turns over $60,000. So this is designed to help those clubs. It's those clubs like that, of which Port Melbourne's one. I think we've got about 20 around our municipality, for whom their rates bill came as a big surprise this year. If you're unsure about this, we get another opportunity to debate this in about 2 months, 3 months' time, when we reset the rates again next year. So if you need further information, there's a couple of months for you to go away and do that before. If you're not happy with this, you can make an alternate amendment to it in about 2 or 3 months' time when we set the rates for next year and we do all this again. So I urge my councillors to support this, urge them to support their local clubs who do such great work in our community, but for whom the rate rises they received this week were shocks to them, and this is not. It's not giving them any money. We're just taking less from them. So look at it that way.
I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried.
Division required.
Councillor Bond has requested a division. I'll put that motion again. All those in favour? Councillor Brand, Councillor Bond, Councillor Voss, Councillor Pearl, Councillor Gross, Councillor Crawford and Councillor Baxter and Councillor Copsey. All those against? There's none against. There's one abstaining. Councillor Simic. Thank you. Now we'll move on, and we are getting to the end of this 14.9. So Clean Streets Service Review, 6 months progress update. No one that's requested to... Oh, sorry, 14.10. Clean Streets update. No one's requested to speak from the public. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Crawford.
Hi, gentlemen. I guess I just wasn't sure in the review that I could see that I thought there was an intention at some point, and again, I don't know the timing, to hire more manual litter pickers to kind of go work behind activity centres and around activity centres to do the actual picking up. Has that started, and do they have a schedule that they work on?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, we do have a number of manual litter pickers that have started and actually worked through all the trade locations, including Ackland Street, Fitzroy Street, and behind in car parks and behind those streets, and also going to areas such as Faulkner Street and locations through there. We also have a rapid response crew that do the outer areas as well.
Thank you, Mr. Brownstone. Yep, Councillor Crawford.
Just to follow that up, that's good to hear. How often are they? Is it like once a week at each of the activity centres that they go and get sent around? Is there kind of that roughly? Like, I'm asking particularly, I guess, around Carlisle Street and the car park there.
Mr. Branscombe.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, actually, Ackland Street, Fitzroy Street twice a day, 7 days a week, morning and afternoon in between. Balaclava, Coles, yes, we do understand that there's issues through there. And the guys are in there at least 3 to 4 times a week that go through there, but we do understand there are problems through there, yep. Thank you.
Councillor Brand.
Just another little query that I have, and it's a bit unfair to be picking on minor anecdotal things, but it has played in my mind. I was speaking to somebody in Ackland Street, a trader, the other day, and they said there was one of our well-known biohazard incidents happened there, and they called the rapid response team, and they didn't arrive till sometime mid-morning the next day, which actually makes it a little. I just want to know what the purpose of the rapid response, what the remit is. What they really are aiming to do. It just shook my confidence in it. I thought it's a fantastic thing to have a rapid response team, of course, but that comment just sort of shook my confidence a little bit on what was happening.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we're really proud of the rapid response team and what they've actually brought to our community, just firstly. Primarily, they have been supporting our local laws team and working together as a group to deal with some very challenging issues. They also provide the call-outs. So, in essence, biohazards, certainly during the day while they're on, they will get there within the hour or 2 hours. There is no doubt about that. We also have a call-out service that through the night we'll try and get there within an hour and 2 hours, which is an exceptional service for council to offer. So look, we're very proud, and there's no doubt that we'll miss a few things here and there, and that may have been one of those moments, but certainly they're on and doing a great job. I can absolutely guarantee that.
Councillor Gross.
Hi, thanks very much for this. One of the problems I see is that people criticise us for not doing any cleaning. Now that we've got the GPS, is it possible to get easy access to cleaning schedules actually done? And, I particularly got savaged a couple of days ago because no one ever cleans in Carlisle Street ever. So, we're not believed. That's my question about access to data.
Mr Dunstan.
Through you, Madam Mayor. GPS has been installed in all the vehicles as part of the fleet, our current fleet management system. There's an additional level to that, which will be the operational the operations system we're calling it, or the ops system, which will allow a lot better tracking of individual routes during the day. And that's under the process of procurement currently. There is ability to gather that data now as to when a truck was in a particular location. However, the current fleet management system is based more around security of assets, so that knowing where an asset probably was, and it's a bit laborious. Within 3 or 4 months' time, once the new operations system is actually in the new financial year, once that's up and running, there'll be a much easier and much quicker response that will hopefully link into the CX system as well.
Mr Johnson, you wanted to add to that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, just to add to what Mr Dunstan was saying. So the GPS system that we've got now, as Mr Dunstan was saying, is very good at locating our assets, but we can take that to the next step and we can actually work out not just if a street sweeper's driven down the street, but how good the actual cleaning has been, how good the cleaning that is achieved through the monitoring, like the brushes and brooms on street sweepers and those kind of things. So there's opportunities to share that data with the community. At the moment, we publish on the council website pretty basic maps that say these areas will be cleaned during these different weeks of the month. But with the investment that's happening in the CX program and through the investment in further technology across the street and beach fleet, there's the opportunity to make all of that information live to the public. So that could be things such as when your bin's going to get picked up during the day, when the street sweeper last came down your street, when about timing, for example, response to leaf season, which is a real challenge in some areas of the municipality. So we've made some initial progress with the GPS system, but further investment there really opens up a world of opportunity to be able to talk to the community about what services we provide to them and probably give them a better level of surety that they're getting out of it what they need.
That's amazing. Any other questions, councillors? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Councillor Crawford to move, Councillors Gross to second. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to the motion?
It's really exciting reading this, like the advances that have happened under your team and all the things that you're doing, so thank you very much. I just have two anecdotal evidence. Often we hear the bad stuff, but I have to say that I do love our streets in Elwood, 3184, and we did one on Ormond Road not so long ago, and there was so much less rubbish than there had been last year. So do you know what I mean? So there is definite, we were like, wow, we didn't have to work as hard. And the other time when I do Elwood plogging on the beach, they always, I didn't realise because I never go that far down the beach, but on the other side of the beach, when it's the bay side, they often, that's a hot spot they go because their beach and all around there doesn't get cleaned as often as ours. So our side is really clean and theirs is not so clean. But it's just interesting to note there is actually a lot of pride in our community about the level of cleaning, and of course there's always more to do, and if everyone just picked up their own rubbish we wouldn't have the problem, but I just wanted to say thank you. This is really exciting and I love some of the things that are being brought forward too, and gosh, where we'll be in another year or two with all of this will be amazing. Thank you.
Well said. Councillor Gross.
I don't know why I'm going to speak because there's no one listening, but I suppose I'm speaking. Sorry, Tessie Bear. I just want to speak to you people to say the obvious, that this business has been through a transition. We were in a joint venture that started off well with an adjacent municipality, and then it went and finished poorly. That left legacy issues that has taken a couple of years, several years to reverse. I sense that the reversal is really happening. Then we had the review. I was interested in that review because it said more of the same, even though we'd palpably had problems with the joint venture. So it was surprising. I was surprised by that response. I've been disappointed because for 10 years the technology for GPS has existed, and I congratulate you, and I'm so happy that you've implemented it. The only thing I'd say is we have to get the data out to the community because we're a highly visited place, so litter's a continual problem. People don't believe me when I say, look, there's very frequent cleaning of shopping centres. They just don't believe me. So we have to get that information out. And I'm so interested in, the CX combination with the data collection that you're now doing. So my message to you is, keep on keeping on and just try to be more of a show-off. This is something that I'm expert in, being a show-off.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Would anyone else? Councillor Brand?
Just want to say, yes, pride in one's work is the greatest currency and the greatest KPI of the lot. So, I think we're doing well.
Oh, short and sweet, love it. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Copsey.
I do want to echo it. I think there's been great work and progress in this team, so just thank you very much to the officers who have been really driving for the excellence that our community deserves and expects, and I think personally, as a Lake Ward councillor, in my first couple of years, you really knew when it was leaf season because suddenly there would be lots and lots of feedback coming through about that. But it really did improve. I've noticed, and I take that as indicative that the community is noticing as well these improvements. So keep up the fantastic work. And I echo Councillor Crawford's thoughts about, we've got some fantastic volunteer teams like Beach Patrol and the EcoCentre and Love Our Streets who do so much litter picking, but it does make me angry as well that work falls to volunteers to end up cleaning up litter that ends up on our beaches and our streets. We can help keep up our end of that bargain by making sure that we produce less litter in the first place. I think it's going to be fantastic to see the difference that's made when Victoria's container deposit scheme finally comes in, and the work that Council is doing in making sure that we have plastic-free events and encouraging plastic-free is actually going to also contribute to this. So there's a few prongs of Council working together here, but on the ground it's making a real difference to people's days. So thank you very much for the great review and keep up the great work.
Anyone else? Okay, Councillor Crawford, would you like to close? No? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Well done, thank you. All right, now we're going to move to item 15.1, which is a notice of motion, parking management in Port Melbourne area from Councillor Pearl. Councillor Pearl will need to get a seconder to this motion, but he has asked to put some pictures up, of which I've agreed to. So, Councillor
Can I ask
Pearl,
a clarifying question of my motion?
Actually, yes.
Is that all right? Thanks. There's a lot going on in this business area at the moment, and there's no end date on this motion for that reason, to not place undue pressure. But I'm just wondering what impact this will have on BAU resources in the area affected and any potential cost impact for council, and how that could potentially be mitigated.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the preliminary information that I have received from the transport team is that the work will take a few months in duration, potentially. If council resolves to progress to make any changes, we would have to consult with properties in the area and also look at the response rates and determine the next steps. We would have to spend approximately $3,000 for a parking occupancy survey and analysis of that information.
But that's not in relation to this motion. That would be subsequent if the recommendation to this motion was to make changes.
It would actually involve some work as well. So we would have to spend $3,000 to undertake parking occupancy surveys, potentially, and 1 to 2 days worth of staff time to do that piece of work. And it could take about 2 weeks to do that piece of work. And then if we're looking at changing parking controls, as I said, that could take another further couple of months. So I haven't, in terms of looking at the operating budget, we may be able to absorb some of that within the existing budget, but we haven't, this amount is not included in Council's endorsed budget.
So just so I'm clear, it's $3,000 in survey cost and 2 days officer time?
For the parking occupancy survey, yes.
And then after that, it's 2 weeks officer time to produce a report to come to council?
Well, it'll take about 6 to 8 weeks to look at if we were progressing any parking control changes, 6 to 8 weeks in duration, and 5 days of staff time to prepare the consultation and assess the responses.
The duration, 6 to 8 weeks, the time spent, investment we're asking for is 5 days of one person, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
We would require approximately, to add all that together, to be reasonable, a few months to undertake this work would be reasonable.
And just follow on, when was the last time we did a parking review of this area?
I'll have to take that on notice.
And when would it be scheduled to review the parking in this area next?
If Council endorse this resolution, we would look at undertaking this work and scheduling it into our work program. Through you, Madam Mayor.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I think the question was, if we didn't do this work now, in other words, save the 2 weeks, when would this bit work come up through our normal parking reviews? I think was that your intent, Councillor Pearl?
So through the parking management policy that was endorsed this evening, we have factored in undertaking some parking occupancy surveys, and we're in Council's 2021 budget, which is being considered and could be undertaken mid this year within existing budgets.
So to clarify through you, Madam Mayor, if we don't do this now, which is about 2 weeks' work, and then, depending on the report, another, I think, 5 weeks' work, it could be prioritised for one of the first parking surveys under the parking policy budget. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is correct.
So, I'd like to ask a clarifying question as well. So is there any difference between our parking surveys and potentially putting in restrictions that we normally do and investigating issues specifically related to the camper van problem? Because that's the problem primarily down there that we're trying to fix. So I just want to see, you know, our BAU, will it fix that issue?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we would be reviewing the parking in that area and any parking controls that may be required to discourage long-term parking. In terms of the local laws and that regulate parking of camper vans, they are able to park there for a period of time depending on length of the camper van. So it may, if we do change parking controls, we may be able to limit parking, but as the local law does permit camper vans of around 7.5 metres to park for about an hour in the street. So I can't answer that question conclusively without doing a review of the parking in that area, but it will be difficult to limit any parking there unless we have no standing zones or parking for less than 1 hour.
Through you, Madam Mayor, can I just step in and just tell you what currently happens? So it is unrestricted. Part of our every morning, our local laws officers actually inspect the foreshore, including this particular area, and in relation to this particular area, we actually educate. So we will knock on camper vans, and yes, it's at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we actually tell them what the law is and we move them on. So we provide an education in regards to, because they're normally visitors and interstate visitors waiting for the cruise ship. And we do take some measures. So in the month of January, our local laws officers knocked on 20 camper vans in this particular area. So compared to other areas in the municipality, this one is particularly not as high compared to, say, the Botanical Gardens, where we actually do have campers and camper vans move on, or our Wood Foreshore.
As part of considering this area, I mean, have we thought about charging them meters? Like, if they're going to park for longer periods of time, why are we not, and they're not their interstate visitors, is that part of the deterrent process we would consider and make money back if they want to stay there for a few hours? Yeah.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that would be considered as part of the review of parking in that area.
Okay. So I think we've had enough time to ask some questions there. Councillor Pearl, would you like to...
I'll read the motion if that's all right, to expand my view out a bit. The motion reads that Council That council requests officers to investigate issues relating to camper vans being parked in the Port Melbourne area, including the Boulevard, the Bend, Cumberland Road, and Batman Road, to provide a report to council on A, the need for any changes to parking controls in this area by reviewing current parking restrictions and parking occupancy, B, measures currently in place to deter camping in these areas, and C, current management of complaints relating to camper vans parking in the space and any improvements required to this process.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pearl. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bond?
Thanks.
Speak.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a very small motion in some respect, and let me give you the background to why I've put this up. And please don't think I'm grandstanding for the sake of a Facebook post or something, etc. A couple of residents have been talking about this for a long time, and okay, there are a couple of them, but one came to the previous council meeting in Port Melbourne and asked a question, and the response I felt was adequate, but didn't go deep enough in terms of the problem. And since then I've been flooded with mainly because I door knocked the area and to get a better view of it, but got a much better grasp of what was happening on the ground, and perhaps I wasn't aware of the situation as I was the week after that council meeting. So I'm making this move, which generally speaking councillors don't like doing, because we get involved in something quite minute and operational as opposed to governing by policy, and I get that. And generally officers are reluctant to do because, we're getting involved in operational matters, and I take that as fair criticism. But the difference with this incident is that it straddles a couple of policies. We're not necessarily just talking here about parking restrictions. We're talking here about local laws, occupancy rates of parking, which probably isn't an issue in this area, but it's the type of occupancy and the behaviour that is going on there and what we want to incentivise. So I commend the officers in terms of what they're doing around education, but the reality is the investment we're making isn't commensurate to the results because of the problem we're facing. Camping is an issue here, but it's camping for a very short period of time, not for long periods of time. So education doesn't necessarily work because the person's on the Spirit of Tasmania on their way around Australia the next day. So the compounding effect of education that you usually get when we're educating our citizens around green waste or whatever it may be, we're not getting that compounding effect. We might be getting some compliance, but we're not actually getting a compounding effect. So I think this area is different in that it's getting a slightly raw deal in that other areas of Port Melbourne, including Beacon Cove and Waterfront Place, are getting a substantial investment at the moment around traffic studies and movement studies and the effect of the port on their local area. But this area isn't getting anywhere near the commensurate amount, and it has quite a large problem. So let's just have a look at some happy snaps. This is the area we're talking about, albeit the bend, as you know, goes around, but I couldn't work out how to get the line in a circle. So this is the area we're talking about. The part to the right here gets a fair bit of attention, and we have a reasonable amount of investment, as you all know, in Waterfront Place in terms of investigating the traffic in that area. Let's move to the next slide, if that's okay. This is a good example from the other night about the sort of vehicle that is parked here. This is well over the 7.5 metre limit. As you can see, it looks fairly permanent. It's well over 4.5 tonne. The parking occupancy this night isn't much. Is this creating much of an issue? No, the car parked there itself isn't. We don't really want people sleeping there as a matter of course, but the generator that was running out, the diesel generator that was at the back of this vehicle running from 6 p.m. to about 2 a.m. It's running air conditioning. It's a problem. Again, it's isolated, but if we go down there tonight, you'll see a similar type of trend. Just go to the next slide. Then there's the environmental impact of this activity, which would, there's laws against this, but we need to review the impact it's having on our local environment, particularly in this eco-sensitive area here adjacent to the parkland. Just go to the next slide. As you can see here, this is a sewage pipe out of a camper van that was taken 2 weeks ago. This is not acceptable. It's against the law, but education isn't going to fix this issue. We need to work out some way that we can balance the traffic in this area whereby we get the economic benefit that the tourism industry in Victoria has and the role we place, because we are in a gateway area where people are allowed to park their vehicles safely whilst they wait for the ferry, as opposed to using it as a holding camping site, etc., and not respecting our local area. And one more slide. And here's the extreme case, which admittedly doesn't happen very often compared to Elwood, etc. But we also have instances of camping, and this photo was sent to me. I don't actually know when this photo was taken, but we all know what area that is. So what I'm giving to you is some first-hand experience. There is a problem here, and I think closer look from council into this area around basic things around, can we change the parking restriction in this area to get the balance a bit more between giving local residents a fantastic amenity, giving our local residents and the rest of Melbourne access to the foreshore uninhibited by camping vehicles, and also making sure that we're supporting the tourism community by allowing people to park there for a reasonable period of time whilst they wait to queue, generally on the Spirit of Tasmania. So, councillors, I do understand this is a slightly unusual decision, but I hope I can garner your support this evening. I would also just apologise for not canvassing your vote this week. Usually I pride myself on the ability to give you all a phone call before I do these sorts of things, and I haven't done that on this occasion, and I apologise for that, albeit I did circulate the motion last Wednesday. So happy to hear your discussion, but hopefully you support this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Councillor Bond?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good too, Councillor Pearl. Nothing further to add other than the observation that our last three items have been rates, followed by rubbish, followed by roads. I wish the ratepayers were still here to watch us do what councils do or meant to do. Thank you.
Any further councillors that want to speak to this item? Councillor Brand?
I think it would. I think it needs to, in some way, propose where these people would go. I mean, it's a legitimate need that people have coming to the city, travelling around Australia. You can't just sort of deplore them as a problem without satisfying their legitimate needs somehow. I don't know how to do that. Anyway, I'd be looking forward to seeing a proposal for that, and I love the slideshow, but I saw one bus parked there. I saw one, it looked like they'd washed the tyre of the car with some soapy water, another one with a bucket of water, and another. I mean, nothing. It's not that bad. It doesn't seem to me what I saw there, unless it was. Well, I didn't know that. Anyway, thank you very much for presenting that. I'm just a bit unconvinced, but I can see there's probably a problem there.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak to this for or against this motion? I'll speak for it. I think the last traffic investigation was about 2 years ago around this area, and from my experience, the local community really couldn't agree on whether they wanted parking restrictions or not. In the end, obviously, it stayed as it was, and that's basically no restrictions in the area. But there are a number of very vocal people down there that are wanting further restrictions so that people don't park there 24/7. But I do think there is an issue with the bigger vehicles parking in the area. I agree, Councillor Brand, around we've got a problem. I think we all acknowledge that this is a problem for many in the community, but we do need a solution for it as well. So I would encourage the officers as part of this report to perhaps give some consideration about what we should do about, or what we should recommend, for example, to TT lines to say where these vans should be parking, because at the moment there is no direction or advice anywhere, and they just sort of park wherever they can. So I'm going to speak in support. I'm speaking in support of this because I hear about it as well. but I do think it's part of a bigger ecosystem, and it's a bit like the waterbed effect. I think if we do something here, it'll actually, pop up somewhere else. And I think part of the solution is should be looking at the bigger picture around what is happening at Station Pier. So thank you for bringing this to us, Councillor Pearl. I'll be supporting it. Would anyone else? Councillor Simic?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. It's an interesting proposition for us to discuss tonight. It is certainly something that Gateway councillors have been contacted about. I think it is important for us to look at the solutions and to look at the different options. I'm a little bit concerned about the sort of timeframes that we're talking about, the extra workload that this will create for officers. I don't think we've explored enough the question that was asked initially around whether this work could be programmed into existing planned work already. I'm worried about us doubling up. On balance, I am keen to support this proposal, but I would like for officers to look at this in a holistic way and look at the programmed pieces of work to try and find savings where possible in the amount of officer time that's used up to look at this area specifically. So while I'd like to push this work up and for it to happen now, I also don't want to see council redo this work some months from now. So I'd just like some clarity from officers going forward around that. I also would like to encourage officers to provide us with a range of options and solutions to this problem for us to address down the track, echoing what Councillor Brand called for earlier. So thank you, Councillor Pearl, for bringing this to us tonight, for councillors discussing it. On balance, I think we are moving in the right direction.
Okay, doesn't look like anyone else has got their hand up there. Councillor Pearl, would you like to close?
Thanks very much. I just thank Councillor Simic for his comments and just make the point that you're right to be worried about the effect this has, and I do understand, we all understand when we put these motions up, there is an effect. To mitigate that, we haven't put any time limits on it, and we're hoping that this works with the policy initiatives, but we also get a really defined result so we can help these people that need a little of assistance without providing undue stress in terms of time or economic pressures on the budget. If it does, I would expect officers to prioritise their work accordingly. But hopefully this gets up, and thanks very much if it does.
I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion is carried. Thank you.
Division required.
All those, Councillor Bond has requested division. I'll ask that you vote again. All those in favour? Councillor Copsey, Councillor Simic, Councillor Brand, Councillor Bond, Councillor Voss, Councillor Pearl, Councillor Gross, Councillor Crawford and Councillor Baxter. That is unanimous. Thank you. By councillor delegates, item 16. Councillors, do we have any reports? There are none tonight. Good. We'll move to item 17, which is urgent business. Councillors, is there any urgent business? There is none. Then we'll move to item 18, which is confidential matters, and we have one item of confidential tonight, 18.1, administrative matter. So I'll now call on a councillor to move that the meeting be closed to members of the public. Councillor Gross to move. Do I have a second? To Councillor Bond. So that the meeting be closed in accordance with section 89(2)(d) of the Local Government Act 1989, as the item relates to contractual matters. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? That is carried. We'll wait till the gallery's cleared and the door is closed.